Greetings, Dragon Slayers and Giant Killers. You are listening to the 137th episode of the Lord of Spirits podcast. I'm Father Andrew Stephen Damick in the Tower of Podcasting, perched precariously atop a disused gateway to the underworld. And with me is Father Stephen Young from Lafayette, Louisiana, tunneling through the swamp via the infernal depths of the internet into your earbuds. And we're not live. That means that Mike, Emperor Penguin of Japan, Dagan, will not be taking your calls, but he will probably be editing this episode, I think. So the reason we're pre-recording this one is that just when this episode airs for the first time, we're going to be beginning here in Emmaus, the service of the Orthros of the 12 Passion Gospels for Holy Thursday night. And no doubt our friends there in Louisiana will begin shortly thereafter in the Central Time Zone. And that's actually our subject for this episode. We're looking at the Passion readings in all four of the Gospels. Although we're going to look at them as a sort of a single big chunk for each. It's not going to be divided up into 12. And we're going to focus specifically on the events directly surrounding the crucifixions. So first, a few words of Prolegomena, as it were.
Yes.
So what do you have to say for us here at the beginning?
Super scholarly.
I know.
And academic about it. Prolegomena. To all.
I mean, friend of the show, Bart Ehrman, has been coming out with his comments on whether Jesus really rose from the dead. So, you know, we can be scholarly too, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, by that standard, lots of things are scholarly. But, friend of the show, Bart Ehrman, probably the foremost text critic of our time, right? But his discipline has nothing to do with the historicity of Christ's resurrection,
or with, frankly, interpreting the text,
right?
You know,
remotely to do with that, right?
Right. That's like saying if you're an amazing car mechanic, that you can win the Indy 500. No.
Yes.
These are not the same thing. You may not even know how to drive.
Yeah. You could be that guy who changes out the front left tire really fast, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. The pit crew.
Yes, yeah. But the driver has a different skill set. Yeah. So nonetheless, we're going to be pedantic and have a prolegomena. Basically, the reason for the prolegomena, and therefore the contents of the prolegomena, is going to be dealing with why we're going to do what we're doing and why we're doing it the way we are doing it. So it's really more like a foreword or introduction to a book than a scholarly prolegomena, but we're putting on airs.
Yeah.
So,
there you go. Putting on airs on the air,
yes.
As it were.
Extra air.
That's right.
Gas bags.
Air supply.
So yes, as you mentioned, we're going to be going through basically the narrative of Christ's trials and crucifixion in each of the four Gospels, one at a time, and that's the key element of the how we're doing it. That we're now going to talk about why we're doing it that way, because there are certainly other ways of doing it. And you mentioned the service of the 12 Passion Gospels, and the Gospel readings there are interesting because to a certain extent, it's going through each Gospel separately, but not always, right?
Yeah.
There are a few that are composite. And then in the services for Great and Holy Friday, they are composited. At Royal Hours, there's some composites, and at Unnailing Vespers, there's a composite reading. But even a composite reading, and what I mean by a composite reading is you're reading part of St. Mark's account, and then you have a paragraph or two from St. Matthew, and then you go back to St. Mark, right? For example, that would be a composite reading.
And in some cases, you know, the readings will skip a few verses here or there.
Right. But even a composite reading is not a harmonization.
No.
Okay. And harmonization is the primary thing that we're rejecting in favor of how we're doing it. And harmonization is when you take the accounts from the four Gospels and you just kind of smush them all together to make one big composite account, but it has pieces of all four accounts jumbled together. Right. And you sort of choose in what order to jumble them, right? Because you're taking an element that only appears in St. Luke's gospel, you're plugging it into St. Mark or St. Matthew's gospel, and where you plug it in is sort of your own arbitrary choice in your harmonization. And you may be thinking, well, I don't know that I mean, you may be aware, if you're into deep cuts, you may be aware of the Diatessaron that Tatian wrote.
Citation, yeah.
In the early church, where he sort of harmonized the four accounts together. You may be familiar with more recent. You can buy like harmonies of the synoptic gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But many of you may be saying, well, okay, yeah, I mean, those things exist out there, but like, that's not really something I hear. Like, you don't hear readings from Tatian's Diatessaron in the last 1700 years, at least.
Right.
Or anywhere outside of Syria ever. So, like, why is this an issue to address? Well, actually, you hear harmonizations all the time. You just may not realize it. So, like, one of the most popular versions, right? And we're actually recording this during Papal Holy Week. And for some reason, all of our Protestant friends celebrate Easter when the Pope tells them to. So if you drive around my town, this is probably true for Father Andrew. This is probably true for a lot of the listeners. If you were hearing this in what is now your past, you will see signs at some of these Protestant churches saying, at their Good Friday service, they're going to be talking about the 7 sayings of Jesus from the cross.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a harmonization. None of the 4 Gospels say that Jesus said 7 things from the cross.
Yeah. Right.
Each of them records things that he said. And if you add up all the discrete things from all 4 Gospels, you get 7. But none of them say he said 7. Right? And so that's one way you get a harmonization. There's a lot of casual harmonization in sermons and homilies and stuff that you'll hear this time of year, where as the story is just being recounted in the sermon or something, pieces from different Gospels will all get sort of jumbled together. As one version of the story. And here's the core problem of that. But also the genesis of it is, pun intended, is that we have 4 versions of the story of Christ's death that are canonical. Right? Meaning there are 4 versions of that story that have authority in the church. St. Matthew's version, St. Mark's version, St. Luke's version, and St. John's version.
Yeah, each one as its own coherent whole.
Right. Those 4 are authoritative. And I say it's the genesis of harmonization because, especially in modern times, and by modern times I mean like the last 500 years, but even here and there before that, right? The fact that there are 4 has been seen to be a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they're not identical.
Right, can't they get their story straight?
Right. And so harmonization is an attempt to sort of diffuse that criticism or solve that problem. Okay. But here's the thing. That's not really the problem. And it creates another problem. The problem it creates is that when you do your new harmonized version, you are telling a fifth version of the story.
Yeah, and in many cases where someone might, say, oh, there's contradictions between these two, then they're either cutting one version in favor of the other, or they're coming up with a third version that attempts to include both.
Right. That's the more common.
Yeah.
Right. You end up with this fifth chimera version, right? But that fifth version that you came up with to try to harmonize them is not canonical.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is not an authoritative version. Right? You have created a fifth gospel, essentially, which is a non-canonical gospel at best. Right? And if you're not careful, could be heretical. Right? That's but at very least is not canonical. Okay. Now, if we're going to set aside harmonization as not a good solution because it creates more problems, right? How do we solve this problem? Well, there's a couple of things. Right. Number one, the 4 canonical gospel accounts all claim to be or be based on eyewitness testimony. They do not all claim to be eyewitness testimony. Right? St. Luke does not claim his eyewitness testimony. He claims it's based on eyewitness testimony, that he talked to people, he interviewed people, he had written accounts that he used as sources. So he claims it's based on eyewitness testimony. But, right, St. John's Gospel, for example, claims to be eyewitness testimony. Okay?
Yeah.
And if you know anything about eyewitness testimony, and by that I mean you've even watched a good legal show, right? Like not a recent episode, but an old episode of Law and Order, from like the 90s. You know that eyewitness testimony, if you have multiple eyewitnesses to an event, their testimony is never identical. If they're real eyewitnesses.
Yeah. Well, and you might think, well, we don't have this problem anymore now because we have, video recording, so in some cases we say, well, let's just go to the videotape. But in some ways this has gotten worse, right? Like, witness every time some kind of confrontation happens between, law enforcement and a protester at some event, in our day. And there's, 100 people standing there with their cell phones out recording what's going on, and various recordings get spread around the internet. There's endless debates about what actually happened. People slowing it down and pausing at a certain moment saying, oh no, but this other camera angle shows this. So even then, even with, things that are being committed to digital media, you're still not getting the same story.
Right, because you're from different angles.
Yeah.
Right, and that's compounded with a human brain, because you remember certain things and don't remember certain other things. You notice certain things, you don't notice others. You focus on certain things, you don't focus on others. Right, and that's going to be different for every eyewitness. Right.
Yeah.
And this isn't just some modern thing that we've come up with due to this objection. St. John Chrysostom pointed this out about the Gospels at the end of the 4th century. He says anybody who's ever investigated a matter knows that if all the witnesses give exactly the same testimony, it means they concocted their story.
Yeah, because they all got together and said, okay, let's make sure we get this the same.
Yeah, I got it straight. That if they're actual independent witnesses, their stories are all going to be, broad strokes the same, but there are going to be little differences in details they notice, some that might even seem contradictory, right? So then the other element, and all of that is sort of unconscious stuff, right? Like when you're watching something happen, whether you're watching it directly or, kids these days, you're watching it through your phone. You're not consciously choosing, okay, what element of what I'm seeing should I focus on, right? Like, what details do I want to remember, right? That's all stuff that's happening unconsciously, right? But when you later go to tell the story of what you saw, right? What did you see? What happened? You were there, right? Then when you tell that story, there's another level that enters in of conscious choices.
Yeah.
Right? Because when you tell that story later, you're not going to sit there and try and remember every single little detail, right? And oh, by the way, the guy standing to my left was wearing a red sweatshirt.
Yeah, I mean, some details,
like
they're real, but they don't matter to the story. And what the decision about what matters to the story is the decision that you make as the storyteller.
Right. Right. And this is why, like, if you're offering testimony about something in a court case, this is why you get asked questions. They don't have you just come up there and tell the story and then leave, right?
Yeah.
Because you, when you tell the story, are not saying every single little detail that you remember. There might be a detail that someone else thinks is important that you didn't think was important or didn't realize was important, and you need to be asked about it, right? But you're making conscious choices, which means that the gospel writers, right, did not just sit down and try to record every single fact that they were aware of, right, about Christ's trials and death. Right? They didn't record the relative humidity, the temperature of the day, right? Like they didn't, you know what I mean? They like not every single fact they could possibly find or remember. They're choosing to tell the story in a certain way, to emphasize certain things about it, right? That those are conscious choices, and the four gospel writers make different choices.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that they're coming up with contradictory versions of the story. It's that, number one, they have a different set of eyewitness testimony facts available to them. And then number two, they're making different choices about which of those to record and how to record them, what language to use, what words to use to describe things.
And some of it's just, who these four men are, their personalities, their own preferences. Like, it's often been mentioned, for instance, the St. Luke being a doctor, that, he's very precise in certain kinds of ways, very historical also, but also, there are elements of choices they're making that are based on who their audience is. Who do they intend to communicate this to, Yeah.
And they have very different levels of facility with the Greek language.
Yeah.
To boot. Saint Mark's Greek is notoriously horrible. People don't like to say that because it's in the Bible, so they don't like to say his Greek was horrible. So when you read commentaries, you read scholarly literature about Mark, it's always like, his Greek is rustic. Rustic is like the most popular adjective. That's
nice.
That means he uses Greek like a hillbilly, right? That's basically what that means. So, right, he's and St. John's Greek is horrible in a complete other way. First language English speakers don't realize how bad St. John's Greek is, because his Greek is the easiest to read for English speakers. Because he tends to write like subject, verb, object. Like he uses a lot of constructions that are familiar to English readers syntactically. Yeah. But that is not good syntax in Greek. That's really bad in Greek. But so English speakers don't always realize that. St. Luke's is probably the best Greek out of the four. And Saint Matthew's, because Saint Luke is deliberately he's deliberately aping like Thucydides and other Greek historians' style, like on purpose.
Yeah, he's making it sound like educated Greek to some extent. And from what I understand,
and a historical text in particular.
Yeah, like Septuagintizing it to.
Well, no, that's more Matthew. Saint Matthew is
okay.
using Septuagint Greek, so he's got all kinds of Hebraisms and stuff in it. That's why most people agree now erroneously think it was originally written in Aramaic. It's because he has so many like Aramaisms and Semiticisms in there in Greek, right? Where they don't belong. But that's not an indicator that the text was originally in Aramaic, because someone translating an Aramaic text to Greek would have taken care of those.
Yeah.
Right. This is the mark of someone who is a native Aramaic speaker. Greek is their second language, and they're writing sort of in Aramaic in Greek.
Right.
In the way that a lot of people, you've met people who are immigrants from other countries, for example, and their first language is a language other than English. And so they'll say things in English, but they'll use sort of weird syntactical constructions that come from their first language. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to do quasi-racist ethnic parodies here of it, but people know what I'm talking about, right? You've met people and they say something like their word order will be weird for English.
They'll leave out articles because their language doesn't have articles.
Or doesn't use them that way. Yeah. So we've all encountered this, right? And the syntax they're using is perfect syntax for their first language and just not correct for English, right? But they're still thinking in their first language and then speaking in English. That's what St. Matthew's doing. But so, that's going to color things too, because their facility with language is going to open up or close off certain realms of description of things, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, and this is where the whole why this is a mostly a modern problem thing enters in, is that there was this whole dynamic, we've talked about this on the show before, where as you get into the 17th and 18th centuries and modernism is taking hold in Europe, that you get the early liberal schools of biblical interpretation that are all based around, at first it's, okay, we need to come up with some scientific explanation for how the text is true that doesn't involve anything miraculous.
Yeah,
right. So you get what used to be called swoon theory, for example.
Oh, wow. Yes. The idea that Jesus didn't die. He just sort of swooned, and that...
Yes, he went into like a coma, and they thought he was dead, and they buried him, and he woke up on the third day. Because they didn't want to deny the historicity of the text. They just wanted to deny the point. So
yeah, I mean, this is much like, with a friend of the show, Bart Ehrman, basically saying recently that the disciples of Jesus had visions that he was alive. So then they accurately reported what they saw in visions.
Yes. Yeah. And John Dominic Crossan beat him to that by a few decades. That was this whole thing. He was talking about, people all the time have experiences where they believe they saw or encountered their dead loved ones and all this.
Yeah.
So you come up with some suicide, but then, eventually once you get toward the end of the 18th century and into the 19th century, they're just kind of like, maybe we should just deny that this ever happened. Maybe that's easier.
Right.
Right. And so they just started denying that any of the things in the Gospels ever happened.
Yeah.
Right. Because they didn't make sense with the scientific worldview. Right. And the response to that as we've talked about on the show before, was an equally modernist response, right? So the modernism fundamentalism debate was really between two sets of modernists, because the fundamentalists, the Christian fundamentalists, who later became evangelical fundamentalists and then just evangelicals, and now who knows what they've become, watching stuff on TV. That group didn't try to go back to the way that the scriptures had been understood throughout church history, even by the Protestant reformers. They said, no, all of this did happen, it is true, and we're going to use modern methods and modern modes of reasoning to prove that it all happened.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so the bone of contention became not what does this mean? What is this about? You know, what did Christ do? What did he accomplish in his death and resurrection? Right? Like, from an Orthodox perspective, the Protestant reformers gave wrong answers in terms of that, but at least they were addressing the right question. Right? But once you get into the late 19th and early 20th century, right, the evangelical fundamentalists are not even asking that question. They're just trying to prove it happened. We gotta prove Jesus existed. We gotta prove he was crucified, and we're gonna try and use modern historical methods to prove that he rose from the dead.
Yeah.
And that's still going on to this day.
Yep. I mean, this is the whole evidence that demands a verdict, you know, Josh McDowell. Like, this is the whole kind of low church Protestant apologetics factory is based on this question.
Yeah. And it is complete modernism. It is complete modernism. Because you have accepted all of the modernist presuppositions. You have granted them everything in the argument. You're trying to use the same processes they use and arrive at the opposite results. As if the methodology and the conclusion are unrelated. Right? And so what that does to the text, and why we're talking about it again now, what that does to the text is it says, okay, what the text is claiming, what the text is asserting, the purpose of this text is to tell you XYZ happened.
Yeah. No.
Right. And that then is what makes, when that's the debate, that's what creates the problem of there being four different accounts. Because from that perspective, each of the four is claiming this is exactly what happened. And so any discrepancy then means that one of them is quote unquote lying.
Right.
Or at the very least, three of them got it wrong, right, on some of these things. But that's based on these presuppositions. Okay? And so the fact is, the text, it's not even on the list of things that it's claiming that this happened. At the time the texts were written, and at the time the texts were first read, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that these things actually happened. The things we're going to be talking about tonight. Essentially, that Christ was crucified by the Romans with the collaboration of the Jewish leadership at the time. There was, no one contested that at the time. No one contested that for centuries and centuries and centuries, right? That was not a contested fact. And so since that's not a contested fact, none of the four gospel writers had as their purpose to assert that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And still to this day, there is no doubt among anyone sane that Jesus of Nazareth existed and that he was crucified by the Romans in the early 30s AD.
Because this is not just, hyperbole here. This is the single best attested fact from the ancient world.
And you know who said that? Friend of the show, Bart Ehrman.
There we go.
In his book, Did Jesus Exist?
Yeah. I understand there's people out there who want to say no. And usually the motivation for that is, I don't believe Christianity is true. Bart Ehrman doesn't believe Christianity is true. He doesn't. He does not. But he still says that. And saying that, and if you don't accept that, then basically what you're asserting then, and you may not know this because you may not spend a lot of time in text from the ancient world. If you say that couldn't have happened, that it's not really, true.
Or there's not enough evidence even.
There's not enough evidence.
There's not enough evidence to believe that he existed.
Right. Then you basically have to say, we can't know anything about the ancient world.
Yeah.
Because
you can't know Julius Caesar existed. You can't know Alexander the Great existed.
Right. All these things that are generally taken for granted by most people who are studying that stuff at all.
Yeah.
And on the basis of much, much slimmer evidence. Much slimmer evidence.
Yeah. And so Bart Ehrman, friend of the show, this is one of the reasons why he's friend of the show, by the way, Bart Ehrman, is
only
regardless of our disagreements, right? He is genuinely trying to be an honest broker. He was genuinely trying to look at this stuff honestly. And when he looks at it honestly, right, regardless of where his heart lies and what he might want to be true or not true, right, we don't have to psychoanalyze him, right, because he looks at it and he says, look, there's more evidence for the fact that Jesus of Nazareth existed and was crucified by the Romans, roughly these dates, than anything else in the ancient world.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's just an assessment. So anybody who you run into online who claims Jesus never existed is not a serious person.
Yeah.
They are a flat earther.
Well, it's just like I've gotten a bunch of comments on a little short video from a while ago, because it's about Passover and stuff, it's suddenly getting paid attention to again. A bunch of comments about Ishtar and stuff, and I'm just like, oh, there you guys are again.
Yeah. That's not a serious person. That's a flat earther, right? I get you don't trust the government at all, so you don't want to believe anything NASA says. Okay, but like the ancient Greeks figured this out, man.
Yeah, they did. They did. Yep.
This isn't just NASA propaganda.
Say it must be an exciting moment for those people, because they just launched some people back to the moon.
Oh, we're going to get some YouTube comments that are mad because I have before.
I'm excited. I'm excited about all that.
But yes. Oy.
That's a pretty good Prolegomena.
Right. So if none of them are claiming this is exactly what happened, quote unquote, objectively, an objective fact is not even a category they had available to them in the first century. But they're not making that. What are they doing? They're making various claims, because there's 4 different authors, right, about the significance of Christ's trials and death. Okay? These are events that everyone accepted happened. The gospel writers are talking to us about why it's important that they happened. And so the details they're choosing to relate, the way they're choosing to relate them, the language, even the words they're choosing to use, are all designed to convey things about Christ's death, about its meaning, about its purpose, right? About in the trials, about what's going on in Christ being put on trial, about the relationship between Christ and his kingdom and the Roman Empire about, right? They're saying things about this. They're not just asserting that it's real.
Yeah. Yeah.
And claims about the significance of an event, right? If I say, here's why this event, or let's take an example that could come up on the show. I could be like, I think, I was recently on a YouTube channel. I think St. John Cassian is one of the most important saints of the Orthodox Church. And he has some of the most important writings for us as modern Orthodox Christians to read for reasons ABC. Right? And Father Andrew could have gone on that podcast the next day, or gone on that YouTube channel the next day, and said, I think St. John Cassian is one of the most important saints, one of the most important to read, for reasons XYZ. Right? And the fact that my reasons ABC and his reasons XYZ were not identical does not mean we disagree.
Right.
We wouldn't be contradicting each other. Right? That can all be true. Okay, so the claims of one gospel writer that here's what's really important about Christ's crucifixion, and then another writer says, here's what's really important about Christ's crucifixion, right? Unless one of them says it's important and the other one says it's not important, which of course is not the case.
Right.
Right? Those don't contradict each other. That's additive. Right? They can all be true. Christ's crucifixion can be important for a million reasons, right? You could have a million reflections on it. You've got dozens, maybe hundreds in the New Testament, depending on how we want to categorize them, right? And there have been definitely hundreds, maybe thousands more since in church history. They don't necessarily contradict each other, ever. Right? So, all that is why we're going to be going through each account from each gospel and looking at what are the things that each author is emphasizing or pointing out that maybe the other authors don't, or saying in a different way, or interpreting in a different way. Because that way we get a more full picture, right? For having four different accounts is a feature, not a bug, right? This gives us a greater and broader understanding of Christ's death than just one account would.
Yeah.
Right? Sort of by definition. So it's a positive thing. So that said.
That was a good 35, 36, 38 minutes of Prolegomena. So there we go.
As is our want.
Yeah, exactly.
We will begin with St. Mark's Gospel. St. Mark's Gospel we're starting with because it's the one that was written first. And I know there's going to be angry comments about this. Because people have weird associations with various ideas of the relationship between the Gospels somehow being connected to completely unrelated doctrines. Okay. St. Mark's Gospel coming first, right? The biggest reason for this, people believe this in the pre-modern period, is because of the tradition that he is writing essentially the memoirs of St. Peter.
Yeah.
Shortly after St. Peter's death in the 60s AD. Okay. So what caused the Gospels to be written, right? The earliest texts we have in terms of when they were written in the New Testament are not the Gospels, it's the epistles, specifically St. Paul's.
Yeah.
Right. But then the other epistles. The epistles come first. They're dealing with things in the life of the church, right? But obviously, while the apostles are writing epistles, cue Danny K bit again. while the apostles are writing epistles, they're still alive. And they're still exercising their authority in the church through those epistles, right? As the apostles are martyred, most of them, right? The church begins to lose the apostles, start to lose the eyewitnesses, right? There becomes a necessity to record their testimony in written form for future generations, right? And so starting with when St. Peter is executed by Nero, St. Mark, his disciple, heads to Egypt, writes St. Mark's Gospel, which is writing down St. Peter's way of telling the story of Christ, right? That St. Mark had heard from St. Peter firsthand. That's what saying his is the first written is based on. Not anything modern, not Q, get Griesbach out of here. That's what it's based on, okay? The whole Matthew being written first in Aramaic thing is based on people reading a secondhand quote from Papias sideways that's quoted in Eusebius. We won't go down that rabbit trail now, but trust me, that's way more tenuous and modern than thinking St. Mark was first. That's
all right.
Right.
Let's dive in. So we're going to start with, and the way we're going to do this is I'm going to read and then we're stopping at various points for commentary.
Well, let me give one more note.
Okay, one more note.
St. Mark's Gospel is going. We're going to see here the basic structure that we're going to see in all four. Right. In terms of just big bullet points. Right. And in terms of the section of each gospel that we're going to be reading, there's going to be at least 2 trials. There's going to be a place where Christ is mocked. Christ is going to be crucified. And obviously Christ's death is going to be at the end of the section that we're reading today. But that basic structure of trials, mockery, crucifixion, death, we're going to see that here in St. Mark's Gospel. Those basic bullet points are going to be in all of them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with Mark chapter 14, verse 43, and we're going to go all the way to chapter 15, verse 41. So here we go. And immediately while he was still speaking, and that's Jesus, by the way, while he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Seize him and lead him away under guard." And when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and he kissed him. And they laid hands on him and seized him. But one of those who stood by drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. And Jesus said to them, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled." And they all left him and fled. And a young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his body. And they seized him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked.
So this particular naked man, they call him the Streak.
With the Flash?
Yeah, is the subject of, in some cases, bizarre theories. But traditionally, this is taken to be a guest appearance by St. Mark.
Yeah, who should be reminded, everybody, he's not one of the 12. Not one of the 12. Yeah.
Yes, and would have been younger, right? So this is like a youth, like a kid, right? Like early teens. So that's the traditional understanding. Now, just a note here, because even though this has been thoroughly debunked, every once in a while, around this time of year, in the documentaries, someone will bring up the secret gospel of Mark.
Ooh. We love a secret gospel here on the Lord of Spirits, don't we?
Yes. That sounds terribly mysterious. Yes. this is basically a fellow in the mid 20th century, way back in the 1900s, as the Zoomers say, claimed that he had found a previously undiscovered text of Clement of Alexandria, in which he claimed were these long excerpts from the secret Gospel of Mark. That the regular Gospel of Mark, they put that out to everybody. But if you became one of the initiates in Alexandria, Egypt, they allowed you to read the secret Gospel of Mark.
Ooh.
Which had a number of other passages about this naked man with the linen robe, right? Who it identified as Lazarus.
Ooh, such Gnosticism. Wow.
Yes, and Lazarus was this sort of secret special disciple of Jesus. They didn't let this on in the regular Gospel of Mark, but in the secret Gospel of Mark, you found out that Christ taught him the real secrets of life and death and all of this, right? So yeah, pure Gnosticism, right? And you're like, okay, well, middle of the 20th century, they found a bunch of Gnostic texts, right? No, this is worse. This is just, it's a fake.
Yeah, actual fraud.
Like, it was straight up debunked. It was just straight up proven to be a fake. Like, I'm talking new writing on old parchment, like, fake.
It's a fake.
Right? So.
It's real.
Despite it being completely debunked, shockingly, History Channel documentaries still bring it up once in a while.
You have to put history in scare quotes every time you say
Yes. Was it really
History
a fake?
Channel.
Was it aliens? Right. So, yeah, but it is a fake. So if you see anything about that, just immediately, right, whatever you're watching, is full of it, right?
Yeah.
Because
bust out laughing.
Yes, because that has been long debunked.
Okay.
A whole century ago.
All right, picking up with verse 53. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. And Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands. Yet even about this their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?
Let's pause here for just a second.
Yeah.
So the problem here is, of course, if you've read your Deuteronomy, right, you have to establish everything by 2 or 3 witnesses. And their testimony has to agree. And so they're trying to accuse Jesus of things, and they've got people they've found who half heard things that he said or whatever, who they're having come in and testify against him, but they're all testifying to different random things, so that doesn't help them.
It's like reading a subreddit.
Yeah. And so eventually they get 2 of them who both talk about him saying he's going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Some version of that, right? Like,
yeah.
But even that, it doesn't quite match. Like, they both have versions of that,
And of course, the high priest is just like, he said, what? What?
Yeah.
What is it these guys are saying about you?
Exactly what that would be, right? Like, is that blasphemy? Because
it just sounds impossible and weird.
Yeah. I mean, and especially when you bring in, as St. Mark does here, this idea of this one built with hands, this one built without hands. There were already Jewish traditions about the third temple being made without hands and coming down from heaven, right? And that temple that had been built with human hands was associated with Herod. So, arguably that could be a positive thing, right? He could be saying, like, we're going to get rid of Herod's temple and have the true temple, from heaven. Like, that's not a bad thing to say necessarily, right? So the high priest is basically, when he says to Jesus, have you no answer to make? What is this that they're all testifying against you? He's just sort of getting frustrated because he doesn't have anything he can.
Yeah, looking for a smoking gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, picking up with verse 61. But he remained silent and made no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the high priest tore his garments and said, what further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death.
So this is an interesting passage, this part, for a couple of reasons. So he finally asks Christ, are you the Messiah?
Yeah.
Right. Are you the Christ, the Son of God? That's, are you the Messiah? Are you the Messiah? And if he had just said he was the Messiah, right? If we understand Christ's answer as just meaning, yeah, I'm the Messiah, that's not blasphemy.
Right.
That doesn't explain their reaction.
Yeah, blasphemy would require that he's claiming divine status.
Yeah. Lots of people showed up claiming to be the Messiah. Right? And the general policy, and this is still true, by the way, of like very Orthodox Jews who are the ones who are still expecting a Messiah, right? They will just look at someone and say, well, that could be the Messiah, right? That could be the Messiah. And you see some of that in the Gospels. You see people saying about Jesus, could this be the Messiah? Right? Like that idea, they were not, he might be, he might not be. Let's see what happens, right? That was their attitude toward it, right? The attitude was not, how dare you claim to be the Messiah, right? That's blasphemy. No, right? So it's very clear, as Father Andrew said, it's very clear that the rest of the answer, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. They understand him to be claiming to be the Son of Man.
Yeah. I mean, this is a reference to Daniel.
Right.
Seen in Daniel.
Right. Coming with the clouds of heaven, who's enthroned at the right hand, right, of the Most High. This is Christ claiming to be the second power in heaven, right? And they understand it that way. That's why they say it's blasphemy.
Yeah, which it should be said, by the way, these people who say Jesus never said he was God. Again, I mean, they all understand him to be saying that he's God. At
least divine.
Yeah, at least divine in some way. Like people say sometimes, well, Jesus never claimed to be anything but a man or whatever. No, the people around him understood him to be saying different things than that.
And this is in St. Mark's Gospel.
Yes, the one that was sort of supposedly low Christology.
Yes, the one with the supposedly low Christology.
Yeah,
that has this. But the other interesting thing is, and it's hard to translate, only partially because of St. Mark's Greek. And I'm not saying that to disrespect him as a saint. It's just the reality. I'm sure his Aramaic was quite lovely. His Greek not so great. And if I was trying to compose in first century Greek, I don't know that I would end up doing much better from the perspective of the first century Greek.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but it's hard to get into English. Like the way Father Andrew read it was, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power. What it actually says in the Greek is something like, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Like I think the King James has henceforth.
I do love a good henceforth.
Henceforth, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power. So it's not just saying in the future you will see this. It's saying from now on you will see this.
Yeah, this is
right, which is a little harder to understand. But in order to understand it, we have to go back to Daniel. This is something we're going to be doing a lot in this episode, actually going back to the Old Testament when it's referenced in this story, to see what's actually being referenced. What happens right after the enthronement of the Son of Man? He comes on the clouds of heaven. He's enthroned at the right hand of the Ancient of Days, and then he judges the creation. Okay. So what Christ is saying here, by identifying himself with that particular prophetic vision of Daniel, is at this moment, Christ is under judgment. He is being judged by the high priest and the Sanhedrin.
They're probably enthroned. Like they're probably sitting in judgment.
Yes.
While he stands as the accused.
Right. And he's saying, from now on, right, now it is going to be him. He is now going to be enthroned. Right? He's going to his death, but he's also going to his enthronement. He is going to be enthroned. He is going to be judging the creation. He is going to be judging them.
Yeah. So that makes him mad.
He is going to be sitting in judgment over them. So he's claiming to be this divine figure, and he's saying that he is going to be sitting in judgment over them.
Which probably seemed laughable, but also made him mad.
Yes. Did not diffuse the situation.
Yeah. Right. That's why the next thing that happens, verse 65, some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, "Prophesy." And the guards received him with blows. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came. And seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, "You also are with the Nazarene, Jesus." But he denied it, saying, "I neither know nor understand what you mean." And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, "Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know this man of whom you speak." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you would deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept.
So,
go ahead.
It's interesting that so St. Peter's denial is in all of the accounts in different ways. But remember, this is based on St. Peter's way of telling the story. And what's interesting is this is the last appearance of St. Peter in St. Mark's Gospel.
Huh. So this is, in a sense, this is Peter's repentance.
Yeah. He doesn't include, it's only St. John who tells us about St. Peter being reinstated.
It's interesting for multiple reasons.
Yeah. But St. Mark, St. Peter, as he told the gospel story, thought it was very important to say that he had betrayed Christ even more. I mean, we saw them all scatter when Christ was arrested. But St. Peter thought it was important to emphasize in his telling of the story the fact that he himself had betrayed and denied Christ.
Speaks very, very well of him. Okay, picking up now in chapter 15. And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." And the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, "Have you no answer to make? See how many charges they bring against you." But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. And he answered them, saying, "Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the king of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas. And having scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. And the soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is, the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. And they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they were striking his head with a reed, and spitting on him, and kneeling down in homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak, and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him.
So this is, notice there's these two mockery, right? Both trials end in him being mocked and rejected, right? So we have this parallel between the Jewish leaders and the Roman authorities.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me too, like in this reading, Pilate seems to think the crowd's going to go one way, but then it says that the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have him release for them Barabbas instead. So it's like, well, maybe maybe the elite have a problem with him, but the average person, I'm sure, doesn't. That seems to be what his reasoning is.
Yeah, the idea that it's jealousy. Yeah.
Okay, picking up now with verse 21. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them to decide what each should take. And it was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha! You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders said, "Behold, he is calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And Jesus uttered... Go ahead.
So, a few things here, right? So Christ says, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And certain people base their whole theology on this.
Yeah, right. This one line, the idea that they'll say, I was raised with this idea, God the Father turned his back on the Son. That's what that's what they'll say. He turned
as if back. Christ is just here in agony, uttering a logical proposition.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, of course, absurd. It's especially absurd since this is the first verse of Psalm 22, Psalm 21.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, frankly, this idea that the Father could be in any way separated from the Son.
Well, yeah.
Either
we won't go down too far down the anti-PSA rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think it should just be mentioned, though,
but,
since it's here. It should just be mentioned that either suggests you have a messed up Trinitarian theology, right? Essentially that you're some kind of tritheist, basically, or you don't believe that the one on the cross is truly God, which could either
you have a messed up Christology.
Nestorian or an Arian or I don't know what, something weird, So
an Apollinarian like William Lane Craig.
Yeah, exactly. No, he's a neo-Apollinarian.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like just don't go there, kids. Like it's just messed up. But as you said, yes, this is the beginning of one of the actual Psalms.
Right. In terms of reading and interpreting the text, just the very presupposition that this is a logical proposition about the state of the relationship between our Lord Jesus Christ and God the Father is absurd.
Yeah.
It is absurd in context. Okay. Christ is in agony. Christ is beginning to pray Psalm 22. 21 in the Greek. The reason I'm going to keep saying 22 is because, as the text makes clear over and over again, he's praying it in Aramaic, where it's Psalm 22.
Yeah.
So, and that's also important, right? He's not making a logical proposition in Greek. He's praying in Aramaic. This is the colloquial language. He's not just like, hey, here's some Targum for y'all.
Also, this is another kind of a side comment, but it's worth pointing out here because this is the place to point it out. Is there are some people who will say that the Bible translation that is called the Peshitta, which is an Aramaic Bible, they'll say, well, this is the original, and the reason they'll say it's the original is because it's in Aramaic. Right. The idea like, well, that's the language being spoken there, so of course that would be the original and the Greek must be a translation of that. But here's the problem is if you actually open up the Peshitta and look at this passage, it will say in Aramaic, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which it would only say that if they were translating from Greek. Because in the Greek, what it says, it transliterates these Aramaic words into Greek characters, and then it translates it into Greek. And the Peshitta, slavishly following the Greek, just repeats the Aramaic and then translates the Greek into Aramaic. And that's why it appears twice. So like this, that just shows that the Peshitta is a translation, which is fine. I mean, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. The other really important thing about the fact that Christ is here praying Psalm 22 is that Psalm 22 includes verse 24 of Psalm 22.
Yes, which says, for he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him.
So the whole movement of the psalm is that it appears to everyone that God has forsaken this person. But it is not the case.
Right.
Okay? So once again, right, this is true countless times throughout St. Paul's epistles, throughout the Gospels. The easiest way to rebut any Calvinist assertion is to flip to the Old Testament and look up the quote.
Yeah.
But so this is Christ is praying this in his agony in Aramaic, right? Praying this psalm. Though it looks to everyone like he's been abandoned, God has not abandoned him, has not turned his face away from him, right? And is going to deliver him out of this, is going to deliver him from death itself. God the Father is. That's what Christ is saying here. The other interesting note is that the bystanders, so this never made sense to me as a kid, hearing it in English, because I'm like, Ellie, Ellie, and they're like, he's calling Elijah. What?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yay, English language.
I mean, it's just how we got here.
Yes. So in Hebrew, Elijah's name is Eliyahu. Or Eliyah, short, right? Right. Eliyah, Eliyahu. That gets brought over into Greek. Greek names have to end with a sigma.
Yeah.
So it becomes Elias.
Elias. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it gets changed. So, Eli kind of sounds a little bit like Eliyahu or Eliah, and
Yeah.
especially if it's a man who's frankly going through crucifixion.
Yes. So he's saying Eli, they think he's saying Eliyah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then he's calling to Elijah. Why would they think that?
Why would they think that, Father?
Let's
Stephen?
take a pause. Isn't that a weird thing to assume?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't the natural assumption be, wouldn't Occam's razor, he's saying Eli, my God. He's calling out to God. Right? Like, wouldn't that be, right? Unless, and frankly, this is the only way this makes sense. In the first century, Jewish people, commonly invoked the prayers of the saints. Like Elijah.
I mean, he'd be a big one.
Who had gone up to heaven in a chariot. And
Still one of the most popular saints of the Middle East. Big time. Huge.
Yes. Right? Does it, right? That's the only way to really make sense of the passage. Why would anyone guess that?
Yeah. Yep. All right.
Right? Like if you saw someone dying, if you saw a Jewish person dying, right, today, average American, right, sees a Jewish person have a heart attack and drop in the street, right? And a Jewish person is going, Eli, Eli, right? Would you assume he was calling out to God in Hebrew, or would you assume he was calling Elijah? You'd assume he was calling out to God. That's because the average American is a Protestant.
Right.
It doesn't invoke saints.
Yeah, it's just not a thing.
Right? But it was such a common thing that that's their assumption.
Yeah.
And the last thing here, this is just a note to hold on to for later. Okay. Here, St. Mark presents the stuff that's put in the sponge and put on the stick. This is put toward Jesus to try to finish him off. Essentially, it's being used as a sedative. When someone is crucified, basically, this often takes days for them to die. But basically, what they're forced to do is use their badly injured legs to lift their body up in order to breathe. Their body is put in this stress position where they can't breathe. They can't fully take in oxygen. And so they have to push up, and their bare, usually scourged back is up against the wood. So every time they do this, they're ripping more flesh off of their back, right? In order to take a breath. And eventually just your strength and your body gives out and you suffocate to death. Sometimes thrashing violently. So the crucifixion is such a horrible way of dying that we came up with a new word to describe that level of pain and torture. It's excruciating.
Yeah. It's literally the idea that it's like being crucified.
Yes. So this was the worst form of public humiliation because people were crucified naked, and torture that the Romans could come up with, and they were pretty inventive. And they do it in different ways. That's how St. Peter ends up getting crucified upside down, sideways, all kinds of different horrific things, right? But so the idea here in St. Mark's gospel is what they're putting on the sponge is essentially a sedative, right? that sedative will make him unable to push himself up and he will die. And so when they go to give it to him, these onlookers who are watching this horrific public torturous execution say, no, don't give it to him yet. Let's see if Elijah comes to help him. Right. They want to let his suffering go on. Right. So that was something of a mercy killing, but still it was offered in order to attempt to kill him more quickly.
Okay. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was the Son of God."
So, if any of you have seen the movie Quo Vadis, they cast John Wayne as the centurion.
Truly this man was the Son of God.
Right, to just pull everyone right out of the movie.
It's my best John Wayne right there.
Now, the way it's usually translated, like this was the Son of God. I get why they do that, but realistically at the time, and if you actually read it, it's more like, surely this was the son of a god, right? This is a pagan centurion, right?
Yeah, he's saying this guy is divine in some way.
He didn't have the concept of the Son of God, the Messiah, right? That's not a thing.
Yeah.
For him, at least at this point, at this moment. And so it's probably more just him acknowledging from the darkness, from the all of these signs. The curtain of the temple getting torn in two is a subject of a lot of, frankly, weird interpretation in Protestant circles.
Yeah,
I think the going Protestant interpretation seems to be that this was to let everyone into the Holy of Holies,
which not a thing.
Literally didn't happen.
Not a thing. Yeah. And well, I mean, this is like, and this is often aimed at the veiling that's going on in traditional Christian churches, whether, the super amount of veiling that we have in the Orthodox Church, or even the lesser amount of veiling that exists in, Roman Catholic churches.
With an altar
just like
veil.
They'll say the whole call no man father thing is basically to say to Catholic priests, you shouldn't be going by father. I mean, there's completely anachronistic interpretations and suggests like, oh wait, all these Christians didn't read those Bible verses? Just ignore them.
Yeah. So the key problem with that interpretation, that this is everyone being allowed into the most holy place, is that curtain that we're talking about was between the holy place and the most holy place. So only priests during their time of service were allowed into the holy place. So at most, this would be giving priests other than the high priest during their time of service access to the most holy place.
Yeah.
Women couldn't even go to the gates of the outer court of the temple.
Yeah, this is so many layers in.
They were in the court of women at this point in history. And then men who weren't Levites could go to the gates of the courtyard of the temple. There were a number of barriers. This isn't the only barrier between the people and the most holy place.
Yeah.
So that interpretation makes no sense.
It'd be like saying, that the door of the Oval Office was smashed into pieces, and so now everyone in America can enter. Oh no. Nope.
Yeah.
A lot of layers.
You still have to get into the White House and into the West Wing and into the
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what's actually happening here, right? This is judgment. This is not a positive sign. Right? This happens when Christ dies, not when he rises. Okay? This is a sign of judgment. The curtain is ripped open and opened to reveal what? What would be revealed in that case? That there's nothing there. No Ark of the Covenant, no presence of God. Remember, the presence of God never came and filled the second temple. There's nothing there. This is judgment against the temple. Who ran the temple?
Sadducees.
And in particular, the high priest.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we didn't read that many verses. The whole authority of the high priest, this high priest who condemned Jesus, this high priest who went out among the people and agitated for him to be crucified unjustly, right? The whole base of his power was that he was the only person who had access to that most holy place, and therefore to the presence of God. And now, by ripping open that curtain, God has revealed that the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a judgment against the high priest and against the temple. And so when the temple goes away 40 years later, it's because, well, who needed it?
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
All right. Well, that completes our reading of St. Mark's account of the Passion.
There's a couple more verses.
Oh, excuse me. That's right.
Let's skip those last couple verses.
That's right. There's a couple more verses. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. Yeah. All right. Verse 40. Verse 40. This is important. There were also women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the younger, and of Joses and Salome. When he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him, and there were also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem.
So, and that's the reason it's important to get those verses, and we'll note a couple other things here. Remember we said in the Prolegomena that this is being presented as being based in eyewitness testimony. That's why these people get named. Right? These are people who were still around at the time. Right? So, like, it seems like a super random detail that Simon of Cyrene is identified as the father of Alexander and Rufus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, which suggests you could go to Alexander or Rufus and say,
right,
hey, did your dad do this? And be like, yeah, he did.
Unless these are members of the early church, right? Who people could, and this is saying, hey, these two were there, right? And saw this and talked about it. And the same thing with the women who are named, right? Who were there and saw these things.
All right. Well, that concludes our reading of the Gospel of Mark, focused on Christ's Passion. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Matthew. Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're doing a special edition, pre-recorded edition of Lord of Spirits podcast. We're talking about the Passion narratives in the Gospels. And we just did the Gospel of Mark, so now we're heading on into the Gospel of Matthew. So this narrative picks up in Matthew chapter 26, beginning with verse 47. And just as we did the last one, we're going to read through and commentary along the way. This is almost like an episode of the whole Council of God, Father, except you got me in the background.
Well, and we're not doing verse by verse because otherwise this would be like an 8-hour episode.
That's true. That's true. Okay. All right, Matthew 26, verse 47 through, we're going to be going through chapter 27, verse 56. While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs, from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I will kiss is the man, seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and he kissed him. Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place. For all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels. But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so? At that hour Jesus said to the crowds, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples left him and fled. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. And Peter was following him at a distance, as far as the courtyard of the high priest, and going inside he sat with the guards to see the end. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last 2 came forward and said, this man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. And the high priest stood up and said, have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you? But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, you have said so, but I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, he has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment? They answered, he deserves death. Then they spit in his face and struck him, and some slapped him, saying, prophesy to us, you Christ, who is it that struck you? Now Peter was sitting outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came up to him and said, you also were with Jesus the Galilean. But he denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you mean. And when he went out to the entrance, another servant girl saw him, and she said to the bystanders, this man was with Jesus of Nazareth. And again he denied it with an oath, I do not know the man. After a little while the bystanders came up and said to Peter, certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you. Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know the man. And immediately the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Now, chapter 27. When morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate the governor. Then, when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since it is blood money. So they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom its price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave him for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me.
Right. So, here we get another Old Testament quote, right? And this is something that St. Mark didn't tell us about, was about Judas not really repenting.
Yeah, I think, doesn't another gospel say he had regret, which is not the same thing as repentance? Like he felt bad.
Yes. And so this is a good object lesson, right? And especially since it's put here in sort of this contrast with St. Peter, right? Of the difference between St. Peter's tears of repentance and Judas's guilt, right? Or regret. Those are 2 different things. That repentance has to do with a desire to be healed, has to do with a sorrow over what one has done. Whereas just guilt has as its only goal to be rid of guilt. I feel bad about it. The solution to the problem is I don't want to feel bad about it anymore.
Yeah.
The solution for St. Peter is not just him not feeling bad. He can't take back what he did because it's done, right? But he wants to be healed from it. He wants reconciliation, and we know from St. John's Gospel, as we already said, that he's going to receive it. But here, so Judas just tries to give the money back. Like, well, if I give the money back, maybe I won't feel so bad about it. And they, of course, refuse to take the money back, right? Because they don't even feel bad about it, right?
Yeah. They even know what they've done. They're like, this is blood money. Like they know what that means, like,
yeah. So, yeah. And so that's why it for Judas just ends in self-destruction, very literal self-destruction, where, he may have thought, so there is within the Jewish understanding, if someone received the death penalty, right, under the Torah, and like for having committed murder, and they accepted it, then the shedding of their blood was seen to atone for that sin of murder. Like, that was that life for a life. That was the way of making it right. And so that obviously did not apply to self-termination. We'll try to keep this up on YouTube. Right. So, clearly Judas knew enough of the Torah to know he had sinned and had blood on his hands, but not enough to be able to understand what the solution to that might be.
Yeah.
And so it just drives him to despair. But there's this Jeremiah quote, right, that we get here. And again, if you go back and you read that passage in Jeremiah, what you discover is the idea here is that the 30 pieces of silver, that was the price for a slave. And so the idea in Jeremiah's prophecy is that that was the value that they had assigned to God. So the idea of the prophetic action with the money in Jeremiah is that, a slave was sort of the bottom of the human hierarchy, right? And the Israelites, in this case, the Judahites, because the northern kingdom was already gone, were devaluing God to the point that they were treating God as if he were the least valuable human. Right. And despite their sort of despisal of God, right, and their devaluing of him, he nonetheless, because that money is taken for the potter's field, despite that, God still benefits them. Okay. So the idea here is not like, oh, look, here I found this verse in Jeremiah that talks about 30 pieces of silver and Judas betrayed Christ for 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah. Yeah.
Add this to the list of prophecies fulfilled by Jesus, right? That's not what's happening here.
Yeah. It's not like, because no one in the first century thinks that way. It's not like,
right.
We have to come up with this big list of prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. That proves he's the Messiah.
Right. And that's not what fulfilled means.
Right.
Right. the idea here is, in this passage in Jeremiah, there is this pattern that the prophet is pointing to, because this wasn't the only incident. It's this pattern throughout Israel's history and Judah's history and Judea's history of them devaluing and disdaining God, who had given them all these benefits and done all of this good for them, right? And despite that, even in their despisal of him, even in that devaluing, God continues to give them good things and to help them and benefit them, right? He takes even their despisal of him and turns it to good, right? And Christ's death, Christ's crucifixion at their hands, right? And everything, all the benefit that comes from that for them is the ultimate example of this pattern. Right? What could be a more full version of devaluing and disdaining God than murdering him?
Yeah.
And what could be a greater benefit received in return than the salvation that comes in Christ? So that pattern is filled to overflowing in this event. This pattern that's been true all the way through. Right? And so what the St. Matthew here is doing, and this is the way St. Matthew does prophecy and fulfillment all the way through his gospel. He is just exhibit A of this pattern. But to one degree or another, all the gospel authors are doing this, right? We have this, in certain ways, unexpected event, right? Not whether they should have understood the scriptures differently or not. Your average Jewish person in the first century did not think that the true Messiah was going to come and then be crucified by the Romans. That was not their expectation, regardless of whether it should have been. It wasn't.
Yeah.
And so that's why, even as St. Paul is writing his epistles, he says that the crucifixion is a stumbling block for the Jews. And so passages like this with Jeremiah and St. Matthew citing it are trying to show that this isn't the Messiah being crucified is not this radical departure, right, from what you see in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the Old Testament. In fact, it is just the biggest, most clear example of a pattern that you see all the way through the Scriptures. It is totally in keeping with it. Not only should it not be a stumbling block, you should look at it and say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. If you look at how Israel all the way along the way devalued and disrespected God despite all of his blessings, and he still continued to bless them, yeah, this would be the ultimate example of that.
All right. Yes, so picking up now with verse 11. Now when Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." Then he released for them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified.
Okay, let's talk about Barabbas a little.
Yes.
Because we get some more details here that are important. That's why we waited till here to talk about it.
Yeah,
So-
because he came up earlier. Yeah, and it really should be more like Bar Abbas, right? Or something like
Yeah.
that, Barabbas.
Yeah, bar being the Aramaic for son of.
Yeah. Like, St. Peter's called Simon Bar Jonah, son of Jonah.
Right. Right. And so Bar Abbas means son of his father. That's obvious, right? Everyone is the son of their father, by definitionally. But normally you would have like Simon Bar Jonah. Jonah is the name of his father.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so most people understand this to be an indicator that Barabbas was illegitimate.
It should be noted, by the way, that the idea that someone would be commonly called son of so-and-so rather than necessarily their first name, like Barnabas, I mean, that's the same kind of name, right? He's just called that. But, I mean, this is still a thing in the Middle East. I don't know about in modern Hebrew culture, but definitely for Arabic culture, there are people who are called, Ibn Samir, Ibn Fuad, or whatever. Like that, people commonly call them that, and indeed, the fathers are often called, like the famous leader of in one of the Palestinian Palestinian people, he's called Abu Mazen, is what most people call him. Meaning father of Mazen. So even fathers are sometimes called by their oldest son's name, but father of that guy, and mothers, same thing, Mazen, Samir, whatever. So like this is not a deeply weird thing that someone would be called by their father's name in this way, or son of that guy, basically. But in this case, it's son of who, it's sort of what's going on here. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why it's taken to be that he was illegitimate. And since he is a notorious prisoner, right? Like there's certain things culturally that check out there. Notice also, remember, St. Mark said that he had committed murder during the insurrection. Meaning he had been part of a failed revolution. He had been part of the quest of a failed Messiah. So he's an illegitimate man who committed murder in the name of a failed Messiah, right? And so in a certain way, Barabbas actually is all of the things that they're accusing Jesus of being.
Yeah.
Or that Jesus is accused of being throughout his life.
Yeah.
Right. Barabbas actually is those things. This person who's set up over on the other side. Also, and a close reading of St. Matthew's text will show you this. So there's this thing about Pilate letting someone go every Passover. That's not real. Quite the opposite. Right? Remember, there's Christ at one point talks about the 150 people who Pilate had mingled their blood with the sacrifices.
Yeah.
That was in a previous Passover. There had been rumblings that there was going to be some kind of insurrection. And so he grabbed 150 Jewish men, women, and children at random and crucified them along the roads leading into Jerusalem. So all the pilgrims who were heading to Jerusalem for the feast would walk past them on the way and know not to start any trouble.
Yeah.
So he was not in the business of like, I'm going to release a notorious prisoner.
Yeah, so what does this mean? Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the
well,
anyone who
we have to keep reading.
Yeah.
Right? So they have this prisoner named Barabbas. When they get, Pilate said, do you want me to release Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Messiah? Right? And it says, because he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. So this is what I meant by careful reading. Pilate made this offer to the crowd because he knew that the charges against Jesus were not legitimate. But if this was really a custom, wouldn't he have made this offer anyway?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? And then we get to, besides is how it's translated. But additionally, so this is the other reason he makes this offer, that his wife had sent word to him that she'd had this dream.
Yeah, and in some traditions, it's worth pointing out, by the way, in some Orthodox traditions, she's a saint.
Yeah.
Procla, the wife of Pilate.
That she actually converted, yeah.
I don't think it's all Orthodox traditions, but it is a thing.
But so this detail makes sense of a lot of things. If you understand Romans, not the book, like Roman people. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Roman officials. Okay. Terrified of omens.
Yeah.
Right. How many stories, right? Life of Julius Caesar, beware the Ides of March, and he didn't, and look what happened, right?
Dun, dun, dun. Right.
Right, like on and on. Greek tragedy, right? What is it all about, right? Somebody doesn't pay attention to the signs and the omens, and they end up getting, dragged into Hades by the Furies, right? And stuff, right? So your wife tells you, I had this dream, have nothing to do with this man, he's righteous, right? Don't get his blood on your hands.
Yeah.
Pilate, right, is like, oh, okay, I need to dispose of this, right? Like,
yeah, a first century Roman guy is not going to go, oh, go back to bed, honey. You just had a bad dream.
Yes. This is not based on some virtue of Pilate's that he would never condemn an innocent man. He executed innocent people all the time.
Yes.
He did consider Jews to be people.
Right, as any Roman wouldn't. They're non-persona. Yeah.
Yes. So that's not the issue. Right. And people have brought this up. People who want to attack the historicity of these texts that we're reading today, bring this up and say there's no way Pilate would have even given Jesus a trial. Do you know how Pilate operated? Right. Yeah. He would not give a trial to a Jew. Why would he do that? Well, this explains why.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the only reason.
It's worth, I should also add, by the way, since we're pausing about Procla. So she's sometimes called Claudia Procula or Claudia Procla, and they're obviously that she converted to Christianity in these traditions. Some say she reposed in peace, but others say that she was actually an early martyr. So interesting, traditions about the wife of Pontius Pilate.
The Copts have Pilate as a saint.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I don't know what you do with that, but.
So this is not any virtue on Pilate's part, right? This is superstition.
Yeah.
Right, and cowardice, and moral cowardice, right? That's motivating him here. Yeah. And so he sets up this sham, like, well, who's the worst guy we've got, right, in the prison?
Yeah. Surely they will pick Jesus over that guy, is sort of the thing going on here.
Right. So who's the worst guy we got? And this will get me out of it. Right. And then when that doesn't work, right, then he does the whole performative hand washing. Right. But so that's the thing that's going on here. That's why there is a trial with Pilate. That's why Pilate asks any questions to Jesus. That's why is because of Roman superstition. That's what explains it.
Yep. Yep. All right. Picking up with verse 27. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him.
So, some of you thought we were skipping the blood libel verse, but no, we were waiting for this.
Yes, yes.
So, you've probably heard us on this show make reference to Christ fulfilling both goats from the Day of Atonement, and how St. Matthew in particular makes this point. And this is where that point is made now that we've read this whole section. And it may not be obvious from what we just read that's what he's doing. So let's poke a little more, because in particular, this version of Christ's mockery, right? Everyone describes Christ's mockery, right? Everyone does. But as we said, the purpose of these texts is not just to affirm as a historical fact that Christ was mocked by the Roman soldiers. It's to say something about it. Right?
Yeah, these details mean something.
Yeah. And one place to start when you're assessing that, right? And this is again why harmonization isn't helpful, is that the places where the details are different, that's where it clues you in that something is going on. If you just jump to like, oh, we need to try and make all the details agree with each other, right? Then you're going to miss the points that each are making. So what difference am I talking about here? Well, we're going to start with a scarlet robe instead of a purple robe. Right? That's a detail, right? And if you get bogged down in, well, which was it? Right? You're missing the point. Okay.
Well, also purple and scarlet are kind of almost the same thing at this point in history on some level.
Almost. Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost. But there's an important thing here, right? In using the word scarlet. Right. And that is that. And additionally, in the Greek, it doesn't just say they put it on him. It says they encircled him with. So it uses a kind of weird word, right? Or at least not the normal word for just, putting a robe on someone, right? And then there's also this bit with the reed, where they not only put the reed in his right hand like it's a scepter, but they put it in his hand, and then they take it away from him and hit him on the head with it.
Yeah.
Right? Which is kind of a weird series of events, right? And that's in the context of them spitting on him. But so here's the thing. We have accounts from the first century of how at that time they performed the scapegoat part of the Day of Atonement ritual. The goat for Azazel. One of the places where we have it is in the Epistle of Barnabas, which is in Greek. And that makes it especially helpful for this. Because the Epistle of Barnabas describes how once the goat had been designated as the goat for Azazel, they tied a scarlet thread around its neck to identify it as the goat for Azazel. So that once it's wandering around outside of town, you know what it is, as opposed to any other goats, right? Either wild or just that somebody lost that got away, right? That might be wandering out there, to designate it. So they tied it around its neck, and specifically a scarlet thread, right? So there's an interesting connection. Not only that, it talks about how when they drove the scapegoat out of the city of Jerusalem, because it's coming from the temple, the people would line up and would spit on it and would strike it with a reed to drive it out of the city. And the Epistle of Barnabas even uses the exact same word for a reed as St. Matthew does here. The reed that Christ is struck with as he's being spit upon. Right? And this is all in terms of Christ being led away outside the city to be crucified. So that's one goat. That's the scapegoat.
Yeah.
Takes away the people's
goat?
sins. The other goat, remember, the blood is used to purify the sanctuary.
Yeah.
Right? The blood that purifies, that wipes away sin. Go back a couple verses. His blood be on us and on our children. So think of Moses sprinkling the people with the blood of the covenant.
Yeah, on Sinai.
His blood being the blood of the new covenant. And think of the purifying blood of the goat for Yahweh.
Yeah, so, the people saying this probably would not have been thinking, he will inaugurate the new covenant by dying here, and his blood be on us and our children. That's probably not what they're thinking. And then the people who read this in our time and use this as and frankly, in the medieval period as well, and this has been a thing. Read this as to say, everyone who is of Jewish ancestry is guilty of the death of Jesus. Like they read it that way. That's completely missing the point of what you just said, Father, that this is a reference to the way that the blood is used in the Day of Atonement, the way that the blood was used with the formation of the first covenant. It's not about these people and everyone descended from them are guilty forever.
Right.
That's not what it means.
And this idea, this is all through the Gospels, right? Where we see people saying things that are prophetic in ways that they don't realize.
Yeah, it's a kind of dramatic irony. The reader knows, because the reader knows the scriptures, theoretically, the reader knows something that the people in the story don't.
Yeah. So when Caiaphas, for example, this is another example of this, the high priest decides that he's going to get Jesus killed in the first place, do you remember what he says to the Sanhedrin?
Yeah, it is.
He says, it is good for one man to die on behalf of the nation.
Right. Right. Which, yes, it is, Caiaphas.
It kind of is, right? He made a prophetic statement, but that's not what he meant when he said it.
No, he just meant, let this guy die and not us all at the hands of the Romans.
Yes. And this is the same kind of thing, right? The people kind of don't know what they're saying.
Yeah. Right.
What they're saying turns out to be more true and true in a much bigger, more full way than they can comprehend at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, remember the pattern from the Jeremiah quote. That's not that many verses ago. That God takes his people's hatred of him and turns it into blessings for his people.
Yeah. Yep.
That's kind of the whole point of what's going on there.
Yep. It turns out God really does love everyone. All right. Picking up again now in verse 32. As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink mixed with gall, but when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there, and over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, He saved others. He cannot save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now if he desires him. For he said, I am the Son of God. And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way. Now, from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, This man is calling Elijah. And one of them went once, ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice, and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. When the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place, they were filled with awe and said, Truly, this was the Son of God.
So
There were also... Oh, go ahead.
let's talk about the quote-unquote zombies.
Yes, these people, the saints, it says saints.
Yes. What's in their head? No. We can't know what it's like to be one of them. So yeah, the reason I use the word zombies is not to be flippant. That's your average dumb internet atheist when they bring up this passage.
Yeah.
Refers to them as zombies.
Yeah.
Which is clearly not what's going on. But this is a greatly misunderstood passage, in part because it's a weird couple of verses.
And it doesn't, and nothing more is done with it in the scriptures after this.
Right. You don't hear anything more about it. St. Matthew's the only one who talks about it.
There are other traditions about it, like the Gospel of Nicodemus. The frame narrative for the whole harrowing of Hades is a conversation with a couple of these people.
Yeah. But the biggest weird thing about the verses is not that, some people come back to life. I mean, that happens in the Bible at various points. People are raised from the dead, right? The really weird part, if you read it closely, is that they're raised from the dead at the moment of Christ's death, right? So at the moment that Christ dies, curtain of the temple is torn in two, earth shakes, rocks are split, tombs open, saints come back to life, but then they don't come out of the tombs until after Christ's resurrection.
Yeah, so it's like they're raised from the dead and they sit in their tombs for like
all day Saturday,
a couple days.
They just rest for the Sabbath, and then on Sunday after Christ rises, then they leave, right? So, that seems weird. Again, if you read it super literally, okay? But there are some keys to understanding this that sometimes I think people skip over. And so they're raised, and it's the same word in a different form, obviously, but it's the same word that's used for Christ's resurrection in the next verse when it says his resurrection, right? And so a couple of ideas here. The first idea is that this is St. Matthew's witness to the harrowing of Hades.
Yeah.
Because these aren't just random people who are raised. These are saints who are raised. Holy men, righteous men, right? Zedekim, right? Who from of old, right? Who are raised. So we're talking about Old Testament saints are raised from the dead. So this is his testimony to the harrowing of Hades. They're raised from the dead. The whole idea that they don't sort of emerge until after Christ's resurrection is that the idea is that Christ is then, after the harrowing of Hades, leading them out of Hades. Right? Like sort of an exodus from Hades, from Sheol. Right? Christ is leading them out. That's why they don't come out first, right? Christ is leading them. But the other important language here, because a lot of the questions about this that people ask are, well, what happened to them?
Yeah.
Did they die again? Right? And very well-meaning people get asked this question and give what I think is the wrong answer. This doesn't say that these saints from old were raised and then went and visited their families. Right? It doesn't even say these were saints who were recently departed.
Yeah, it doesn't, there's no detail like that.
We're not told which saints they were. I mean, this could have been King David. This could have been some of the people on the harrowing of Hades icon. This could have been the prophet Ezekiel. Right? It's not like they had families or a trade to go back to, right? Where they just show up at home and be like, hey, honey, I'm back from the dead, right? And then live with their families for a few more years and then die again, right? That's not what's being said here, right? These are identified as saints. And notice it says they went into the holy city, they went into Jerusalem and appeared to many. It doesn't say they lived there, they dwelt there, right? There are actually people that said they appeared to many. This is the language that's used about Christ after his resurrection. Literally, appeared to many is the exact language that's used in some of the summaries.
Yeah.
During the 40 days before Christ's ascension. Right? He appeared to people. These saints from of old appear to people. They've experienced the first resurrection. This is like we had a couple weeks ago, Sunday of St. John Climacus, right? Moses appeared to him. Other saints appeared to him. Right? So this is the context. These people have experienced, these are saints, Old Testament saints, who experienced the first resurrection that St. Matthew is talking about. They've been set free from Hades by Christ, right? And these saints from of old appeared in Jerusalem to people over the course of this of the 40 days as Christ did. That's what St. Matthew's telling us. So this is a different and maybe in some senses crazier phenomena than you thought it was. Yeah, this isn't just like somebody's husband had died and now he comes and knocks on the door, right? And is with the family for a few more years. This is like Isaiah and Ezekiel and King David and King Josiah appearing to people in Jerusalem. That's what St. Matthew is talking about. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay, so
maybe more interesting than the way you used to read it.
Yeah, absolutely the case. All right, we're not gonna take a break. We're actually gonna continue on with Luke's gospel.
You're also not gonna leave off the myrrh-bearing women again.
I'm not. There were also many women there. See, you did this. The thing is that you don't have any notes for this part, so that's what's throwing me. There are also many women there, looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. So there it is. All right, we're going to continue on now with Luke's gospel. And this is in Luke chapter 22, verse 47 through 23, verse 49. All right, verse 47. While he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? And when those who were around him saw what would follow, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and officers of the temple and elders who had come out against him, have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the power of darkness. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little while later someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also is with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly.
Now notice, remember St. Luke at the beginning of his gospel says he had done all this research. Right?
Yeah,
he had
yeah.
talked to all these people. He had read all these written sources. And notice how he has a few of these extra details.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus looking at Peter, I mean, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
And the actual healing of the ear of the high priest servant, where so he's sort of picked up these little extra details and is bringing that bring more. So certainly Christ looking at St. Peter, right, is sort of making more emphatic sort of the power of that moment, right? The healing of the ear sort of also emphasizes the fact that Christ sort of goes with these people voluntarily.
Yeah.
Right. By having this sort of display of his power, right? And so these aren't just sort of random, oh, hey, I found this cool little detail, I'm going to add it to my version. Right. He even in these cases where he has these, he does it with a purpose in the narrative and the way he's telling the story.
Yeah. Okay. Then they, where am I? 63. Okay. Verse 63. Now the men who were holding Jesus in custody were mocking him as they beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" And they said many other things against him, blaspheming him. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council, and they said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." So they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips."
Notice the difference here. First of all, how stripped down this whole thing with the high priest is. And how St. Luke presents it, where it's just, oh, there's the chief priests and the scribes.
Yeah.
Less detail, and even in how Christ expresses it, he just says the Son of Man, nothing about coming out of the clouds. Like the explicit reference to Daniel is kind of stripped out, right? And St. Luke just kind of focuses on the fact that he's identifying himself as this divine figure in general, right? The way he frames it. And this is one of several pieces, but I think this is a good place to indicate this, right? Because it's kind of obvious here. St. Luke's audience, he's writing this for the Greco-Roman world, for, the churches that St. Paul had planted and other apostles, right? That he had traveled with St. Paul. So he's aiming this for a much broader audience that wasn't familiar with sort of the details of how the chief priest and the Sadduceic family existed. St. Matthew is very clearly, there's all kinds of, as we saw, Jewish details and things that somebody who's familiar with the Hebrew scriptures and stuff would immediately click with, right, in what he's writing. St. Luke is writing to a broader audience where he can't assume that.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to describe it in terms that sort of anybody can understand without having to know much about Judaism. And this is a place where we really see that.
Yeah. All right, now we're in Luke chapter 23. Then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see some sign done by him. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other.
So St. Luke has this whole extra trial with Herod.
Yeah, so you got 3 trials.
Yeah. And you notice he brushed past the thing with the high priest again, as we were saying, because of the audience. Notice also when they bring him to Pilate, what the charges are, right? So the whole idea of him being the Messiah wouldn't mean a lot to, right?
Yeah.
Like your broad Roman audience, but they would totally get, right? Like, oh, they accused him of not paying taxes to Caesar. Well, yeah, that'll get you done in, right? And also you notice St. Luke explains that he's the Christ, meaning he's claiming to be a king.
Yes, he's a political threat, Pilate.
Yeah. Well, not just a political. One thing a lot of people don't realize is the word king, the word rex.
Oh, right.
In Latin, was not a positive word.
Yeah, it's a dirty word, even from basically from the Republican period.
Right. The tyrants.
Yeah. I mean,
were called kings.
It's interesting
before the establishment of the Republic.
I don't think Caesar's never called a king.
No, he would never.
That's the one thing that's because we have a grander idea of a king, I think. And whereas for them, king in context meant a tyrant who rules by violence, sort of thing. Rather than reason, and with the people of Rome and the Senate and all this kind of stuff.
King essentially meant tyrant.
Yeah.
To them, in a very literal way, right? There wasn't the idea of a good king. A king meant tyrant. That's why imperator, which we turned into emperor, right? That's a new title that was invented for Caesar, that he's the conqueror. He's the conquering general. He's the one who took all of this territory on behalf of the Senate and the people of the city of Rome. Yeah. Right? But it was the Senate and the people. Right? Yeah. Even when there's an emperor who is a tyrant, right? He's not going to call himself a king. Right.
It's still the idea of some kind of democracy, at least as a front, Yeah. All right.
So anyone claiming to be a king is immediately right. Yeah. This is the worst thing you could be.
This guy's a thug, basically. He's a violent thug.
Right. But even though this Herod thing isn't mentioned, this is in keeping, right? Because remember what St. Matthew is trying to do, and remember what St. Mark's trying to do with the figure of Pilate. Pilate is trying to find a way out of him having to condemn Jesus.
Yeah.
He says, well, we'll get Herod to do it. Right? And Herod he could crucify people, but he had the ability, I mean, as we saw with St. John the Forerunner, he could execute a Jewish person. The Romans didn't care.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. All right, continuing on with verse 13. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who is misleading the people, And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him." But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas," a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them at once more, desiring to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, "Crucify, crucify him." A third time he said to them, "Why, what evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will.
So part of in St. Luke's gospel, this issue of audience, is he's sometimes accused of being overly soft on the Romans, or at least presenting a more neutral picture of the Romans than the other gospel writers do. Because of where his text is intended to circulate. And part of that is people will argue, by this I mean scholars will argue, that he especially, that to some degree all of the gospel writers, but he especially in what we just read, is trying to sort of exonerate Pilate. He's trying to let Pilate off the hook. For his part in killing Jesus. And that's, it sounds plausible at first, right? Because as we just read, right, he keeps trying to not do it, and they keep insisting that he crucify him, right? He's trying to find all these ways. In St. Luke's gospel, he tries to find even more ways than he did in the others to not be the one, right, to execute him, right? And we have the whole, not here, but in the others, we have the hand washing thing and all this. Oh, this is trying to let him off the hook. Okay. But let's slow down a second. Okay. He's not just saying, I want, in St. Luke's gospel that we just heard, he's not just saying, I want to let him go. Right? He's saying over and over again, I don't want to crucify him. I want to punish and release him.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that mean? That means he was going to, and he did, in addition to crucifying him, right, as before the crucifixion. But he wanted to scourge him and let him go. That's what he wanted to do. Okay? And again, these are things that are now considered so barbaric and horrible that we don't have an understanding of what this is, right? So when someone was scourged, right, we think, oh, they got whipped. Not quite.
No, it's way worse than that.
So the scourges had a number of leather straps coming off of them that were used sort of like whips. But at the end of those leather straps were shards of glass, sharp rocks, sharp bits of metal.
It's awful.
Right? And so when someone was scourged, they weren't just whipped. They would whip the scourge. The scourge would wrap around the person's body. And those pieces of glass and rocks and shards of metal would dig into their skin, and then they would rip the scourge off of them.
Yeah, I mean, people died from this.
Yes, no, most people died from this.
Yeah.
Most people who were scourged by the Romans died within 24 hours, just from the scourging.
Yeah.
If they didn't die at the spot for blood loss, they died of infection, massive infection and blood loss the next day, right? Like, shortly thereafter. Okay, we're talking about huge chunks of skin and muscle being ripped off of someone's back.
Yeah.
And then they just throw their clothes on them and send them on their way. In a world with no antibiotics, no sterilization, no way to deal with this. Okay. So the other option was not let him go.
Yeah.
It was, do I scourge him, which will probably kill him, and if not, will leave him disabled for the rest of his life, which will probably not be that long? Or do I just crucify him and viciously torture him to death? Those are the two options Pilate is choosing between for a man he has said is innocent of all wrongdoing.
Amazing.
That's how Pilate is being presented here.
Yeah.
That's not letting him off the hook. Okay. Pilate is being presented here as a profoundly evil, perverse, unjust, cowardly, superstitious Roman, which has complete verisimilitude, right? Like that checks out on all levels.
Right.
Historically. Right? That's how he's being presented. So none of this is letting him off the hook. Right? The hand washing is an act of moral cowardice. I'm going to torture this man to death, but I don't want to be held accountable for it. You gave the order, pal. Like that. You can't just ceremonially wash your hands after giving the order.
Virtuous.
And that makes it okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Picking up with verse 13. Sorry, not 13. 18.
26.
26. Sorry. I've now read so many similar passages in a row that it's hard to remember exactly where I am. See, this is why when it comes time to do this, on Holy Thursday night, you just turn the page and read the next thing.
This is why lectionaries were invented. Yes.
Exactly. And as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene who was coming in from the country and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and of women who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will begin to say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?"
Yeah. So this conversation between Christ and the women of the city does not get the attention it deserves, I don't think.
And there's something about, I was going to say, it's in some ways it's kind of like in a Greek tragedy, like often the main character will kind of address the chorus, and the chorus is often like women of the city. There's something kind of like that going on here too. Like that's what it reminds me of. I don't know if that's what's in St. Luke's mind, but there's something like that. And it's usually when the main character addresses the chorus directly, it's this kind of thing. It's the state of things. That's what it's about. What's going on, essentially.
Yeah. Because so there are people who take 70 AD and then the Bar Kokhba rebellion a little too seriously. They're called preterists. But there are also a lot of people who don't realize the part that it plays in Scripture. And this is what Christ is immediately referring to here in this address, and which he had referred to just a couple of chapters ago in both St. Matthew's Gospel and St. Luke's Gospel. What was going to happen in AD 70 is used as, again, we've talked about this a lot. In Hebrew prophecy, you have the sign and then you have the sort of full fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
Later on. And so the sign of Christ's glorious appearing, the sign of him coming to judge the heavens, the earth, is what happened in AD 70. So having seen that, we know that what Christ said about his glorious appearing and second coming, we know that that's true because we saw that what he said about 70 AD actually happened.
Yeah.
And AD 70, what happens in Jerusalem, is an image of what will happen to the whole world when judgment comes, because it's also fulfilling in the prophets in the Hebrew Bible that judgment comes first on the Israelites and then upon the rest of the world. And this is what the fact that judgment is coming to Judea is what St. John the Forerunner is talking about at the beginnings of the Gospels. He talks about the axe being at the root of the tree and the fire being kindled. And it's what Christ is talking about when he says here that right now the wood is green. It's alive, right? After Christ's resurrection and his ascension, right, once those Jewish leaders have thoroughly and completely rejected him, right, after multiple opportunities, right, that's when the judgment is going to come. Because they will have become dry. They will have cut themselves off from life. By their faithfulness, they will have cut themselves off from the root. Right? And so they will be dry branches. And what happens to dry branches? They catch fire very quickly. Unlike green ones that are still alive. Right? And so what Christ is saying here is ultimately a call for repentance. Right? Don't weep because of the tragedy of the fact that he's about to be crucified. Right? Weep tears of repentance for what's happening here. Right? Because judgment is coming.
Yeah. All right. Picking up in verse 32. 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And that's a new detail in this one. And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise.
Right, so here we get St. Dismas.
Yeah, after whom
wise thief.
The town of San Dimas, California, for all of you Bill and Ted fans, San Dimas is named after the saint.
Though I see no connection between him and water parks. But so there are a lot. I don't know if you want to say how much you want to say about this. There are a lot of traditions about St. Dismas.
Yeah, I'll just briefly say that there is a tradition that this is not the first time that St. Dismas met Jesus. That when Jesus and his mother and St. Joseph the Betrothed and St. James went into Egypt when Jesus was quite young, that Dismas was one of a band of robbers that met them and were going to rob them. But then when the face of Jesus was revealed at that meeting, Saint Dismas said, "Leave them alone and don't rob them," right? Because he had seen Christ. And so then this is, like I said, that's obviously it's not in the scriptures. But then this is given as a kind of a frame for then he sees Jesus again at this point, and there's this connection that has already been established between them as a result of that.
Yeah. So we don't hear about this from the other two. They just make a general comment that those being crucified with him mocked him, right?
Yeah.
And so there'll be so it's a contradiction. It's not, right? Like, do you think everyone there heard in detail all the words exchanged between them and Christ?
Yeah.
Like there be maybe a few people close enough to maybe hear some of it, right? And one of them was mocking Jesus, right? So if that's all someone heard, if they didn't hear Saint Dismas, right? Like this isn't complicated, guys. Like, but also, Saint Dismas is a wonderful saint of the church. There are beautiful icons of him in paradise holding his cross. But he is not our example of the normal means of salvation.
Right.
Why do I have to say that? Because as far as I can tell, from every discussion I've ever had with a Protestant, our Protestant friends think he is the example of the normal means of salvation.
Yeah. Just say the words and you're good.
Yeah. But not even in that positive sense, in the sense that anything you say, right? Well, you should be baptized. St. Peter says baptism now saves you. What do you get? Well, the thief on the cross wasn't baptized.
Yeah. I mean, to me, what that demonstrates is not that that is not normal. I think it does demonstrate something important, which is that God can save people through whatever way he wants. It does show that, right?
Yes.
It does.
Well, and
it shows that the idea that, well, if you're not baptized, then you are going to Hades, to hell. I mean, and frankly, I think it even discounts this whole idea of limbo, because a lot of people will, although this is not an official Roman Catholic doctrine, but I literally saw a video of an Orthodox priest, basically, not anymore. I literally saw a video of an Orthodox priest basically preaching limbo the other day, which was very kind of surprising to me. But if the idea that, well, you can't possibly have paradise without baptism, that's just not the way it is, folks.
Yeah, I think there was some faulty logic going on there. But not even to litigate baptism. It's anything, right? It's you talk about, you need to be faithful in the way you live your life. Well, the thief on the cross, right? Like,
you're not
just over and over and over again. The situation being crucified next to the Son of God, that situation applies to two people in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And only two, and never more than two for the rest of time.
Yeah.
Because Christ isn't going to be crucified again. Okay?
Yeah.
One of those people did the right thing in that situation. One of them did the wrong thing in that situation.
Yep.
Okay? That's not the paradigm for the vast, vast majority of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
And when we talk about what I need to do to find salvation, I'm not implying that if I don't do that, God can't save me. Right? I'm saying that these are the things that I need to do if I want to seek salvation from God. God can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Okay? God can do whatever he wants. I hope he gives salvation to lots of people who don't deserve it, because that's the only hope I have of finding salvation. Okay? That doesn't mean, though, that there aren't things that I do if I want to pursue salvation and work out my salvation, as St. Paul says.
Yeah.
Right. So come on, guys, just stop using St. Dismas as an example of the norm for salvation. He is very clearly a very exceptional and beautiful case.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But exceptional.
Indeed. All right. To finish out the passage, starting with verse 44. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, Certainly this man was innocent. And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home, beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance, watching these things. We're going to take our second and final break, and we'll be back with the Gospel of John. So we'll see you in just a minute. Hey, welcome back. It's the third half of this Holy Week episode of the Lord of Spirits podcast. We're talking about the passion narratives that are in the four Gospels. And in the first half, we talked about Mark, and then we just did Matthew and Luke in the second half. And now into the home stretch with the Gospel according to St. John. So this has been really powerful for me so far, actually. Honestly, like to simply read these accounts one right after the other, the differences really stand out. And I think that's probably the idea. Like in my head, there's a harmony, right? Like, but what's also interesting is how
kind
many
of pulled apart. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How many details that I'm noticing that kind of aren't in the gospel harmony in my head, which is interesting to me. So anyway, okay. Starting with John's Gospel, chapter 18, verse 1, all the way through chapter 19, verse 37. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, Whom do you seek? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. So he asked them again, Whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he, so if you seek me, let these men go. This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken, Of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut it off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? It's interesting that I think the other ones don't identify this as being Peter, but John says it was Peter who did this. Yeah.
Right. And don't name the servant. And
yeah, Malchus.
That last quote about drinking the cup is new here. And so that's why it's a good place to discuss. Scholars pretty much all agree now. You could always only say pretty much. But right. There have been so many examples sort of demonstrated from this by so many different scholars and so many different journal articles and stuff, that there is a broad acceptance of this now, that St. John had access to the other Gospels. Right. And again, this is the main reason why people say St. John's Gospel was written last of the four. Right. At this point, also, of course, that fits with the church's tradition that St. John ended up being the longest lived of the apostles, right? And did most of his writing in the late 80s and early 90s, without a 19 in front of it, just for the record. Right. And so that sort of all fits together, right? When the church's tradition and modern scholarship fit neatly together, I think that's a pretty good sign of accuracy, right?
Yeah.
And so what that means is the way that was demonstrated, and the meaning and the purpose of bringing that up, is that St. John has access to the other Gospels, and so he is deliberately adding in details and connective tissue that aren't found in the others.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's able to look back and say, what are the things that St. John thought were important that weren't already recorded, right, in those other gospel accounts from the other apostles, and add them. And so, I mean, the biggest example of this that isn't in what we're reading tonight is the whole story of the raising of Lazarus, and that being the motivation for the sort of fervor on Palm Sunday.
Yeah. That's
right, of the entry into Jerusalem. There's just sort of this weird, in the other Gospels, right, they describe it happening, but it's sort of like, okay, Jesus is this itinerant preacher, and then he goes into Jerusalem, and everyone goes crazy, and then the next day they all want to kill him.
Yeah.
Right, and
Right.
It's sort of whiplash, right? And so St. John adds all that detail about the raising of Lazarus in Bethany, that's just outside of Jerusalem, basically one of the slums of Jerusalem. Beit Ani means the house of the poor, for those who don't know. So he gives that connective tissue, that sort of explanation, right? And so we're going to see a lot of that as we go through St. John's account, where he's dropping in these details, right? That it was actually St. Peter who cut off the ear. By the way, the servant's name was Malchus. A little bit more of what Jesus said during these events that wasn't recorded, right? We're going to see a lot of that sort of deliberately added to St. John's account, which ends up being the longest account also of the four.
All right, picking up with verse 12. So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it should be expedient that one man should die for the people. There's that reference there. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter stood outside at the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, "You also are not one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said." When he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me?" Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, "You also are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter again denied it, and at once a rooster crowed. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's
Let's
headquarters.
pause there just a second.
Yeah.
So you notice, this other disciple is, of course, St. John.
Yeah.
And he has some more details here because, as he says, he's sort of a distant relative of the high priestly family. So he tells us about Annas and Caiaphas, Annas being the father-in-law We actually now know, this was only fairly recently discovered when we discovered the burial site of this family, which has been found in Jerusalem. It is under a park. They did not tear up the park. The tomb is under the park, but they have like a pipe that they permanently installed, and they send cameras down the pipe.
Okay.
That have laid out like the whole tomb. And they have like the ossuaries of Caiaphas and his family. And they now know that there was a period of time, which St. John suggests here, when Annas and Caiaphas were sort of both high priests. That was not known until recently to be the case, but St. John here suggests it. So St. John knew more about the goings-ons of this family. He had access, right? And so, again, we get these additional details about the goings-on during this trial before the high priest and the elders.
Cool. All right. Verse 28. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. This governor's headquarters, by the way, this is the way the ESV translates the praetorium. But yeah, they didn't want to be defiled so they could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Pilate said to them, what a dumb thing to say. Like, we wouldn't bring him here if he wasn't a bad guy, you know. Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken, to show by what kind of death he was going to die. In other words, crucifixion. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" After he had said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, "I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover, so do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was a robber. We're in chapter 19. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to him, "See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king, but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them to be crucified.
Yeah. So the ending there is one of the actually most, if you really understand what's going on, one of the most chilling verses in the Bible. Where the Jewish authorities reject God in favor of Caesar.
Yeah.
But it comes at the end of a discussion that runs all the way through this sort of extended, we have this much more extended and detailed discourse between Pilate and Christ here in St. John's Gospel that veers into the philosophical at a couple of points, but that also is in a lot of ways about authority, about rule and kingship and what it means. And the reality of who Christ is and what his kingdom is. So we get, this is very, despite the extended discussion, this is very consummate with the figure of Pilate we've seen in the other Gospels, right? He scourges Christ and then says, I find no guilt in him. Then why did you, right? Like, this is the same kind of brutal figure. Kind of tortured by his wife's dream. But we also get this dialogue. And there are two main places where it turns totally to the philosophical. One is, of course, Pilate's question, what is truth? But to understand what's going on there, we have to look at, the discussion leading up to that, which, right, starts with, right, are you the king of the Jews? Right? Because this, of course, is the accusation that he has said he is the king of the Jews, which you could argue is treason.
Yeah.
I say you could argue is treason because, and this may be related to why we saw Herod pop up here in St. Luke's gospel, is that technically Herod was the ethnarch of the Jewish people, right? So that's why there would be further investigation, right? If you're just claiming you should have Herod's job, well, whatever, right? Maybe you should.
Right.
Or are you opposing Caesar, right? That's the idea here, right? And so you get the, are you the king of the Jews? And Christ says, are you saying this, or have you heard people say it about him? Right. And of course, Pilate's response is, am I a Jew? Right. Like, it's right. You're not my king either way, basically. It's it's supposedly your people, right? You're supposed, if you're the king of the Jews, it's the Jews who have turned you over to be killed. And that's when Christ says that his kingdom is not of this world. But then importantly, if his kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world. And it's interesting that it's translated as from there and not and of in the other places. Of is just a less committal way of translating the genitive. But it's really from in all the places, right? And you have to remember in St. John's Gospel and the Johannine literature in general, what the world is. The world is one of the enemies, right? The world, the flesh, the devil.
Yeah.
Right? So this is not the world as in the creation. This is the world is in the domain and the kingdom that's been subjected to the devil. Right? As he says in 1 John, the whole world lies under the power of the devil at this point, right? And so Christ is saying that's not where his kingdom comes from, right? His kingdom is the kingdom of God. But the way Christ says you can tell the difference, right, is that if his was a worldly kingdom, then his followers would be using violence. This differentiates Christ very directly, right, and very pointedly at a surface level, right? So there's the surface level of what he's saying to Pilate is, hey, you've executed your fair share of would-be Jewish messiahs. Every one of them tried to have a violent insurrection. That was their MO.
Yeah.
And that is what marked them as false messiahs. Because they were just doing things the way the world does things. They were just trying to set up another tyrannical government. Right? That's not what Christ is doing. What Christ is doing is something fundamentally different. Right? And so then Pilate asks, right? So you are saying that you're a king of some sort, right? Christ says, you say I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Right? So he is in the world to bear witness to the truth, and everyone who is of the truth hears him. Here's what he has to say. Okay? That is his purpose. His purpose as a king is to bear witness to the truth. So what is opposed here by Christ is truth and violence. Right? Truth and domination. And so Pilate concluding that discussion with what is truth, right? For Pilate, as a Roman governor, truth is violence.
Mm.
Truth is force. Right? The one who is able to enforce their will, that makes their will the truth.
Yeah, I mean, that's
truth.
What's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, the truth is what the emperor says the truth is.
Mm.
And anyone who says it's not true gets disposed of.
Yeah, erased.
And now it's the truth because we all agree. Whereas Christ is pointing out, remember he also says elsewhere in St. John's Gospel that he is the truth. Right? And here he bears witness to the truth. This is about the relationship between him and his Father. Right? And so Christ is pointing to the truth as being God. No, that is what truth is. A human person does not get to decide what truth is. It doesn't matter how much force and violence you put behind it. You can't make something true.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why when this discussion gets recontinued, right? And Pilate says, don't you know I have the power to either let you go or crucify you? I have that authority. Christ says,
yeah,
kinda, right? Kinda. But the reality is, right, that any authority Pilate has is delegated.
Right.
Right. So that's the first place where it turns philosophical. The second place where it turns philosophical is at the point where Christ has been scourged and beaten and mocked and dressed as a fake king, and he brings him out before the Jewish crowds and says, "Behold the man," traditionally ecce homo, right, in Latin. And the reason that is the Latin that's assumed is that when you look at the Greek, he doesn't say do a near, right? Oh, a near, which would be the man, the guy, this person.
Yeah, look
right?
at this guy.
Look, here he is, right? It's anthropos.
Yeah.
Behold man, behold humanity. Right? And what does he mean by that? Why does he say it that way? Because, again, humanity is under the authority of what for Pilate? Violence. Right? He's a victim of the Roman state. Right? And so when he proceeds to keep calling him the king of the people in the crowd, right? That is a series of veiled threats to this rowdy crowd calling for Christ's crucifixion. And this is why he puts the sign over Christ's head.
Yeah.
The King of the Jews.
Listen to you all.
Right? So that the people coming into the city for Passover say, hey, here's your king. Here's what Caesar does to your king. So what do you think he could do to you? Right.
Yeah.
This is the paradigm. Pilate is here representing the emperor, representing Rome, representing the kingdoms of this world that are under the power of the devil for St. John, right? And this is how they view humanity, right? The subject of abuse, subject of destruction, to be used as cattle, to be demeaned, right? There is no value to humanity here. There's definitely no concept of anything like human rights.
Yeah.
There's no concept of man being made in the image of God. Right. This is a denial of that in favor of just sort of raw power. Right. And that's why it's so chilling when after all that, the chief priests speak up and agree and say, we have no king but Caesar. It's just the rule of power and who can do more violence.
Okay, continuing on. So they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of a skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. Pilate also wrote an inscription, put it on the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but rather, this man said, I am King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier, also his tunic. But the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scripture which says, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So the soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus.
So here we have another quote.
Yeah.
Right. And I think people may not realize what's going on here necessarily. So unlike the other Gospels we read, St. John does not have Christ saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, quoting Psalm 22. Yeah. Right? But this bit, they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots.
That's from
Guess where that's from?
Yeah, that's from the same psalm.
Psalm 22. It's a later verse in Psalm 22. So St. John, by quoting a different verse in Psalm 22 regarding the crucifixion, is reinforcing the correct understanding of the other three. That they are citing the whole psalm. That you need to read all of Psalm 22 in terms of Christ's crucifixion. He's not just making a propositional statement about God forsaking him. He's also not just quoting the first line of the psalm. His prayer of the whole psalm is in view, and the whole psalm is part of the context for understanding this.
Yeah. All right, continuing on. So the soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her to his own home.
Yeah. So this is very important. More important than a lot of our Protestant friends especially give it credit for being. They've got a little bit of Romophobia. They start talking about Mary, they get a little itchy. So we need to say, first of all, while yes, St. John did become, for some time, the companion of the Theotokos in the period of the early church, including we see this in Acts. The Theotokos is in the book of Acts. Read it closely. But this is not just, Christ needs someone to take care of his mother. Okay. We know that for sure. Because there is, for example, St. James, St. Joseph's oldest son. Do you think he wouldn't have taken care of the Theotokos?
Yeah.
This is especially silly for Protestants because they want to say that St. James is the Theotokos' son. That's not correct, okay? Yeah. But for a Protestant to make both arguments at the same time is especially illogical, right? St. James not only is a great saint of the church, but was regarded by all of the Jewish people as one of the most pious men to ever live. You think he wouldn't have taken care of the woman betrothed to his father?
Right.
And sometimes in response to that, I have had some of our Protestant friends say to me, well, Jesus' brothers didn't believe in him at this time.
Yeah.
To which my response is, he didn't know they'd repent? You're saying Jesus didn't know?
Wow.
Right? So none of that makes any sense. There is something else going on here. Okay, there's something else going on here. And to understand this, and to understand some things we're about to read, you have to understand that St. John, now, when he's describing the crucifixion, starts to just pepper in all this language from the Greek translation of Genesis. Specifically, the Greek translation of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Okay, he goes back to creation. The creation of man, and starts peppering in this language. One of the things that people notice and think is odd or even disturbing, like a lot of Orthodox folks are disturbed by this because of how it sounds in English. Early on, and even up to here, right, in this very passage we just read, in St. John's Gospel, Christ frequently refers to the Theotokos, his mother, as woman.
Yeah, which sounds weird in English.
It sounds disrespectful.
Yeah.
Right. Like if my mother asked me to do something and I said, woman, right? Like that would not be respectful. Right.
Yeah. And people think English. He's being disrespectful to her, which is nuts.
Yeah. Not the case. Right. Christ kept the commandment to honor his father and mother. Okay. Right. Like that should be non-controversial. So that's how it's going. But he keeps referring to her as a woman. And even here, right, the first thing he says is, woman, behold your son. Right? Then he says to the disciple, behold your mother. If you pay close attention in Genesis chapters 2 and 3, Eve was not originally named Eve.
Yeah, she was first called woman, Isha.
Yes,
I think
Isha.
right, in Hebrew.
Just the word for woman. So her name is woman. After the expulsion from paradise, when she gives birth for the first time and has a son, right, her name is changed to Eve, to Eva, which means mother, because she is, as she says, the mother of all living. Okay. So her name is changed at this crucial moment of the expulsion from paradise from woman to mother. Here, St. John, at the cross, at the beginning of the new creation, right, of the redemption, the Theotokos, who, unlike the apostles, the disciples who ran off, right, unlike St. Peter who betrayed him, the Theotokos has remained faithful to Christ to the very end.
Yeah.
Right? Right here to the cross. And Christ, who has been referring to her as woman to this point, now calls her mother, changes her name from woman to mother. Using St. John as an example of one of her children. Because she, like Eve, is now the mother of all living. Not living in the sense of biological life, right? The biological ancestor of all humans, right? But what does St. John say life is? Right? Christ says in St. John's Gospel, just a couple chapters before this, this is life, to know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you've sent.
Yeah.
So all those who have come to know the true God through Jesus Christ, whom he sent, are now Mary's children. She is now their mother. She is the mother of all the faithful in this spiritual sense. Okay, that's what's going on here. Referring back to Genesis. That's what St. John is doing in the text. And that's the way the immediate disciples of St. John, like St. Irenaeus, that's how they interpret it. Which is further evidence. Right?
All right. Picking up with verse 28. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said, to fulfill the scripture, I thirst. A jar full of sour wine stood there, so they put a sponge full of the sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
So a note here about, right, in all four, he's been offered something to drink on a stick, right? In a sponge. We pointed out in St. Mark's Gospel that there it was to sort of euthanize him, right? Sort of to kill him more quickly, right? Out of maybe spite, maybe mercy. But it was to kill him. And here in St. John's Gospel, I'm pointing to these two because they're perhaps the most different, right? Here, Christ, who was being crucified, who was being tortured to death, who was very near his death, right, at this point says, I thirst, says, I'm thirsty. And someone goes and dutifully gets him something to drink.
Yeah, he's basically giving a command. Basically.
Yes. And so these are possibly the most different. St. John is trying to convey, right, even as he's dying on this cross, is quote unquote helpless, right, quote unquote powerless. He's giving commands that people are obeying. St. John is emphasizing, as he said earlier in his gospel, right? Christ says in St. John's gospel, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down. I can pick it up again, right? Christ is, even in this moment, in complete control of what's happening and is dying voluntarily, right? Now, this is an example of what we were talking about way back in the Prolegomena. Someone, Reddit atheist could come and say, oh, well, what was it? Were they offering it to him to kill him, or were they offering it to him because he asked for something to drink and they were obeying him? Which was it? Which one really happened? Huh? Right? Completely missing the point. Completely missing a point. The fact of what happened, that they put a sponge on a stick and they dipped it in this stuff and they gave it to him to drink, right? All four agree on that fact, that happened, right? But St. Mark uses that fact to make the point that even as he's dying, these people weren't there weeping and showing remorse. They were standing there laughing at him and mocking him and wishing he would die quicker.
Yeah.
St. John is making the point that even in that moment where he's being crucified and dying, Christ is still really the one in control. Can both of those be true?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Very easily.
Yes.
Right? Those do not contradict each other. Those are not contradictory statements. Right? So there's not a contradiction here. There's a richness here. There are multiple levels of meaning and interpretation here. But there's no fundamental disagreement. Definitely no contradiction going on, right, between these different accounts on this point or any other.
Yeah. Okay. Verse 31. Since it was the day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken, and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. He who saw it has borne witness. His testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, that you also may believe. For these things took place that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And again another scripture says, they will look on him whom they have pierced.
Right. So there's a few things here in this last bit of St. John's telling of the story. So the first is we have, because it's we're coming to twilight on Friday, right? As soon as sundown comes, it's now the Sabbath, and on top of it being the Sabbath, this particular Sabbath is the Passover falling on the Sabbath, right? And so it is especially important to the Jews that they keep the commandment from Deuteronomy about cursed is anything that hangs on a tree, that the bodies not be left on them overnight, right, onto the Sabbath, because they will defile the land. You don't defile the land on the Sabbath, especially not on the Passover, which is the Sabbath of Sabbaths, right? So based on that, they say, hey, we need to take the bodies down from the cross. And the Romans helpfully have a typically Roman brutal solution, which is they take a big mallet, basically imagine a sledgehammer, and go and smash the knees of the people being crucified, so that with broken knees and legs, they won't be able to push themselves up, obviously, and they will strangle quickly and die. So they don't go and put them out of their misery in some sort of way reflecting mercy. It's just more brutality.
Yeah.
So they find that Christ is already dead, right? Or appears to be already dead. So they don't break his legs. This is the text that not one of his bones will be broken. This is one of many ways in which, I mean, we only could read a piece here for this episode, but this is one of many ways in which St. John connects Christ's self-offering on the cross to Pascha, to the Passover lamb, right? One of the rules for which in both Exodus and Numbers, one of which, or both, he's citing here, is that it cannot have any broken bones. Right. But so to make sure that Jesus is dead, one of the soldiers, St. Longinus, takes his spear and jams it into Christ's side, right, up under the rib cage, which obviously, if he was still alive, would both cause a reaction, but also kill him, right? Because the spear is going into his lungs and or heart. And when they do this, blood and water pour forth. This is another place where the language that St. John uses, he's getting from, in this case, Genesis 2 in particular, about the opening of Christ's side.
Yeah, like the opening of Adam's side in order to make Eve.
Right. Adam is put into this sleep like death, right? And his side is open, right? As we talked about, he's pulled apart, right? But his side is opened and his bride is brought forth, right? So remember, way back at the beginning of St. John's Gospel, we got the wedding at Cana. So Christ's bride is his people, the church, right? And that is brought forth from his side. But how is that reflected to be brought forth from his side? Blood and water. If we go back and we trace through St. John's Gospel, say this is water, you've got to be born of water and the Spirit, right? This is how St. John talks about baptism, like in the conversation with Nicodemus. Blood, think about John chapter 6. Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. This is how St. John talks about the Eucharist, right? So it is these sacraments, right, which form and constitute God's people, right? And this is not a big stretch. What constituted ancient Israel? Circumcision and eating the Passover.
Right.
Right. And so what consecrates God's people in the new covenant is baptism and eating the Eucharist. Right. This is not like a wild swing, right? But that's what's being conveyed here in this moment. This is where, for St. John, the church is born. From Christ's side in his sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
And we participate in Christ's death and resurrection in baptism. We participate in his sacrifice. We partake of it by receiving the Eucharist. And that constitutes us as the church, his bride. Right, the body of which he is the head, which St. Paul also says about a marriage. Right. So, yes. So that leaves this last quotation, where he says, and again, another scripture says, literally again is written in another place, they will look on him whom they have pierced, which is from Zechariah.
Yeah, Zechariah 12.
And I think, it's very easy to just buzz over that and be like, oh, pierced. Yeah, he's crucified. They nailed him to the cross. Okay, see, they predicted that and it happened. There's a lot more going on here if we go back and read this passage from Zechariah. This is where we're going to sort of close this episode.
Okay. All right. So it's Zechariah 12:7 through 13:1. And the Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not surpass that of Judah. On that day the Lord will protect the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them on that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, like the angel of the Lord going before them. And on that day I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. And I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and pleas for mercy, so that when they look on me, on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. On that day the mourning in Jerusalem will be as great as the mourning for Hadad Rimon in the plain of Megiddo. The land shall mourn, each family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the house of Levi by itself, and their wives by themselves, the family of the Shimeites by itself, and their wives by themselves, and all the families that are left, each by itself, and their wives by themselves. On that day there shall be a fountain opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness.
Yeah. So, in this passage we just heard in Zechariah, who is it who they have pierced, who they will look upon? This person is, first of all, just in the verse that comes from. When they look on me, on him who they have pierced, they shall mourn for him.
Yeah. They pierced God.
God says that it is God whom they have pierced, but also refers to it as him. God uses both the first and the third person to describe the one whom they pierced. But then if we go back a little to the immediately preceding verses, who is this person? A person from the house of David, so it's the Messiah. Right? Who is like God. Who is like the angel of the Lord. So this figure is God himself and the angel of the Lord and the Messiah. They will weep over him as one mourns for an only child, over a firstborn. He's the firstborn son. This is in Zechariah. Okay. That's the quote. This is what St. John is pointing us to understand who Christ is in this moment of his death on the cross, the one who they pierced. This is who Christ is. And then what is accomplished on that day? The people of Judah, specifically the people of Jerusalem, who have just done this, are brought to mourning and repentance. And in response, God opens up a fountain. Remember Christ's side being opened and blood and water flowing out. A fountain is opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from their sin and uncleanness in response to their repentance. This is what St. John is pointing us at with that one little quote right at the end of the story.
Awesome. Well, I don't really have anything to say in closing. It's been just great to go through all these passages and look at a lot of these details that are coming out, the differences between them, and to revisit them. I think, we're recording this the week before Holy Week, so for me it's a great preparation for Holy Week. But if you're listening to this during Holy Week, I'm happy for it, or even after. Probably a lot of you are not going to listen to this until after, but I think it's this is beautiful, beautiful stuff to spend time with as we're looking at Christ's death and, of course, his resurrection. Do you have anything you wanted to add here at the end, Father?
Yeah, I want just briefly. Let me start with a confession. About this Lent. Those of you who are not on social media are truly among the blessed. I am not really on social media. Unfortunately, I get made aware of what's going on in social media. And I am fundamentally not a good person. And one of the ways in which I'm not a good person, I'm about to describe. there's been a lot of furor on social media during this Lent. And I don't think it's been good or helpful for people. There's a lot of people out there who spent this Lent arguing for or against a bunch of heretical ideas having to do with the death of Christ. And that's not how any of us should have spent our Lent. And the confession part is that I have said things publicly that I stand by and that are absolutely true, but I said them at a time during this Lent and in a way that I knew was going to stoke the fire of that and stir people up. And so in that way, I did a lot of people a disservice, and that's why I call this a confession. Because even the people who I think are horribly wrong, and in being horribly wrong about this, are stirring up dissension and confusion in the church, is doing nothing to justify their activities. Me going after them and riling them up during Lent did not help them spiritually, did not help the people arguing with them spiritually, and so I shouldn't have done it. I should have waited. Instead of continuing to kick the hornet's nest. And the reason I'm bringing that up in this context is this is going to first air. This is going to premiere on YouTube and whatever. This episode during Holy Week on Holy Thursday. And one of the magnificent things about that service, I think, is not only that we get to hear the Passion Gospels, but we also get this opportunity to venerate the image of Christ crucified. And I hope that this episode, and reading the four accounts separately, as Father Andrew was just talking about, I hope the beauty of it impressed people. Because I think it's not just a problem of me and my bad behavior during Lent, maybe some other people's, partially instigated by me. I think a lot of the time we pull these things from these Passion Gospel narratives out of context. You know, Christ quoting Psalm 22, the thief on the cross and how he was saved, and all these things. We yank them out and we make them these points of these theological argument, and we dissect things in a way where we lose just the beauty of beholding the image of the Son of God offering himself and offering his life and suffering these tortures and torments for our sake. And sometimes we need to stop the arguing and stop the bickering and stop pulling these things out and playing with them intellectually, and just look and just listen and just behold and just marvel and wonder and give thanks and see how beautiful our Lord is. So that's what I have to say at the end here.
Amen. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. This was not a live episode. This was pre-recorded, but we'd still like to hear from you. You can email us, of course, at lordofspirits@ancientfaith.com. You can message us through our Facebook page. You can also leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/lordofspirits. More importantly, though, if you have basic questions about Orthodox Christianity or you need help to find a parish, go to orthodoxintro.org.
And join us for our live broadcast on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Empty prayer, empty mouths, Columbian reaction.
If you're on Facebook, you can follow our page. You can also join our big discussion group. You can leave those reviews and those ratings in all the appropriate places, and please share the show with a friend.
And finally, be sure to go to ancientfaith.com/support and help make sure we and lots of other AFR podcasters stay on the air. Not everyone can carry the weight of the world.
Thank you. Good night to you all, and blessed Holy Week to you.
You've been listening to The Lord of Spirits with Orthodox Christian priests, Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung, a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio. And I beheld, and I heard the voice of many angels round about the throne, and the beasts, and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power, and riches, and wisdom, and strength, and honor, and glory, and blessing. Revelation chapter 5, verses 11 through 12.